Thank you very much for being here. We want to get underway. We have a very, very full afternoon here, and I am really thrilled and just excited about all the excitement and enthusiasm. I kind of hate to break up the party here a little bit, but wonderful to have everybody here. My name is Carey Law, and I am on the faculty here at the law school, and we are very pleased to host you and welcome you for this important set of discussions today. So I want to welcome all of you as our guests. Also want to welcome and congratulate all of our award winners as well. So the theme for this afternoon, it seems to me, could not be more important. Not only because water is important, and I don't need to really say much more about that in this group, about how vital it is, about how important water systems and their functioning and the access to and the equity and justice to water resources is so vital. But this nexus with climate change was driven home to me this week when the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration released its latest air sampling of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's not showing any decline in those emissions, I'm afraid to say. NOAA reported that the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere today is comparable to what it was 4.3 million years ago. That's the mid-Pliocene era. And what's distinctive is that sea level at that point in time was about 75 feet higher than it is today. And the average temperature was about 7 degrees Fahrenheit higher than in even pre-industrial times. Okay? The large areas of tundra up in the Arctic were actually forests at that time. What does all this mean for us today? It means that as much as we need to continue to make progress to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, climate change is here. And the floods, the storms that will impact and stress, put stresses on our existing infrastructure system, our water infrastructure systems included, are a reality that we need to confront. And the kind of conversation that's planned for today around nature-based solutions and combined sewer overflow remediation in the Northeast MegaRegion could not be then more important for the path forward. We are pleased here at the law school to collaborate and help support this dialogue by providing you this forum, but it's really our Water Center here at Penn who has taken such tremendous leadership on these issues, and they have been at the forefront of bringing together stakeholders, leading a conversation here on campus and in the larger community. The law school is pleased to be one of those key stakeholders, and if there isn't anything that could drive home the nexus between law and water, it's the just announced PFAS regulation, for example, that water systems will be confronting. And here, as someone who teaches environmental law and works on regulatory issues here at the law school, I know there's lots of opportunities for us to collaborate with the Water Center and with our other partners around the university and in the larger community. So this couldn't be a more timely conversation, and I'm very pleased and proud that we can play some small role and help facilitate it. But the real leadership, as I say, is at our Water Center, and it gives me now a great honor and distinction to introduce the executive director of the Water Center here at Penn, Howard Newkrug is the former commissioner and CEO of Philadelphia Water, where he was responsible for all aspects of utility operations, environmental compliance, engineering, financing, budgeting, capital and strategic planning, customer service, human resources, you name it. He was Mr. Water here in Philadelphia, and the 2.3 million people served by our water systems thank him, and I thank him, and I hope you thank him and join me in welcoming him to the podium to introduce our keynote speaker.
And Carey, I mean, this space is so great. The rest of the University of Pennsylvania has nothing over what you guys have in this space. So thank you so much for it. Yes. And hi, everybody. It's so nice to see so many old friends and new friends and people who I may not know. So please, if I don't know you, I'd love to come meet you and see why you're here and what your thoughts are. But today we're going to be talking about the general topics are combined sewer overflows, but that's really just the subtopic of nature-based solutions, which is a subtopic of, what am I doing wrong? Oh. Yep. Okay. How we put together CSOs and nature-based solutions and do it in this time of climate change, and how do all those things work together, and how we do it in this time when there seems to be a lot of money coming from Washington, but it doesn't seem to be nearly enough. And we have a bunch of good speakers, great speakers, and not the least of which is Mark Camerata, who's was sitting next to me over here. Raise your hand, Mark. Okay. Mark is the reason why Green Cities, Clean Waters, and so much more at Philly Water is still moving forward at a rapid, great pace. So thank you for letting me retire. And I'd like to call up Cynthia Kohler. Is she here? Yes, she is. Cynthia is the executive director of Water Now Alliance, and it's really special because we met through Spring Point. Spring Point. We were working with Spring Point together, and what a tremendous, could I say woman?
Moving on.
What a tremendous person Cynthia is, and she's a lawyer, 30 years of experience in environmental law, and has put together her own great organization called Water Now Alliance. And it just so happens that Water Now Alliance and Philadelphia Water and the Water Center at Penn have formed a partnership, and it's a really great partnership, particularly since Water Now Alliance is largely on the West Coast, and obviously the Water Center at Penn is here on the East Coast. So it brings together different ways of thinking and looking at how we deal with the issues that we have. And with that, I'm going to introduce Cynthia to come say a few words.
Thanks, Howard. I'm too short to stand behind here, so I'm going to wander here. You guys can hear me though, right? Yeah. I'm going to be very brief. First, I want to thank Howard and Ellen and everybody at the Water Center for their tremendous partnership. We are so delighted to be part of this great forum and really looking forward to the afternoon. For those who don't know us, Water Now, as Howard was saying, we are a nonprofit network of water utility leaders who work to advance climate resilient, equitable, affordable, and environmentally sustainable water management strategies in their communities. So we work across the one water spectrum: drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. And a lot of our work, and this is why we're so excited to be here today, is based on scaling up utility investment and adoption of nature-based solutions, such as green infrastructure, among many. And that's what really brought us, even though we are a California-based organization, to the work that we're doing in Philadelphia and on and in the Mid-Atlantic region generally. And we actually have staff here in Philadelphia. In fact, I'm going to ask my Water Now folks to just stand up and wave a little bit. Mary Samar is our new Philadelphia person. Caroline Cook is our water policy director in San Francisco. And Becky Anderson is someplace and is based in Ohio. And we also have staff So we're looking to really elevate these solutions nationally, not just in the West. So we're excited about that. And the last thing I'll say is, because you're all wondering about these awards and our wonderful emerging leaders here, we are a network again of leaders. And so part of what we're doing with the support of Spring Point is elevating leaders, the next generation of leaders, and really helping them to to develop their leadership skills to advance innovation, nature-based solutions, distributed, greener approaches. And so we are thrilled to be incorporating them into this presentation, into this forum, and we hope that you'll all stay until the end, see their great videos, and we'll be having a reception at the end to celebrate. So thank you, Howard, and thanks again. We're really happy to be here.
Excellent. Yes, and what Cynthia has done with keynote. Okay. Well, moving on. I wasn't ready for that. I want to talk some more. And thank you, Cynthia, for reminding me that I did not point out the people here who are with the Water Center. Would you guys all please stand up and be acknowledged? We're all small but mighty, and we're all in the Philadelphia region. So with that, we have a keynote speaker. We're very, very, very fortunate to have Dr. Shipra Narang Suri, who's an urban planner with a PhD in post-war, this is so cool, post-war recovery studies from the University of York in the United Kingdom. And wow, if that was not just seeing what's going on in the future and the absolute need that we all are going to need, because hopefully all these wars are going to end sometime soon, and they're certainly going to need recovery folks out there, particularly for water systems. So it's a really critical place. And she leads the UN Habitat's Urban Practices branch, where, among other things, she looks at nature-based solutions in a global context. So with that, I'd like to bring up Dr. Suri, who is where? Oh, that's you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Very good afternoon. Really, it's a great pleasure and an honor and a fortunate coincidence, really, that I'm here for this huge opportunity and this possibility of meeting you all today and speaking at the Water Forum. As has just been introduced, I'm Shipra. I work for the United Nations, UN Habitat, which is the United Nations Human Settlements Program. We're headquartered in Kenya, in Nairobi. So I'm just coming from with a short flight, just to be here. And I'm here because I'm hosted this week by the Perry World House as part of their Fellows Program. And this has really given me an opportunity to engage with a very wide spectrum of people, professionals, for researchers, academics across the university here. It's my first time at Penn, and really a massive opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit about UN Habitat first, just to introduce who we are and what we do. And then talk about this nexus of climate and water resilience and the role that nature-based solutions play in that context, zooming out a little bit from this region, from this country, and giving you examples from a global perspective from 3 other parts of the world, which I hope will somehow spark and inspire ideas and discussion and solutions that you yourselves are looking for in this part of the world. UN Habitat is a very small UN agency. The United Nations is made up of a number of specialized agencies offices, funds, and programs. Obviously, the most visible ones and the most known ones are UNICEF, which deals with the issues of children, World Food Program that provides food aid around the world. You might know United Nations Development Program, which has a global footprint in about 185 countries around the world. And some of you in this room might also know our sister agency, the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, which is very much part of the whole discussion around environment, ecosystems, nature-based solutions, plastic pollution, and many other ecological issues. UN Habitat was set up in 1976 as a specialized agency, as a center for human settlements. Our job was to start looking at issues of housing and sustainable urbanization. We have grown, but we've always been based in Kenya. That's our headquarters, Nairobi, along with UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program that I just mentioned. We get our mandate from countries, member states, as we call them, in the UN. They tell us what to do. They decide the mandates. And over a period of time, we've had several major milestone documents, such as the Habitat Agenda, which was adopted in 1996, and the New Urban Agenda, which was adopted in 2016, which actually shape what we do. The larger global mandate is given by the Sustainable Development Goals, for example. You may have heard of those, which is a set of 17 goals and 169 targets that countries have agreed to achieve by 2030 to achieve, to eliminate poverty, to have a more just and more fair world. We are present today in about 90 countries around the world. We do normative work, which is basically developing tools, standards, guidelines around urbanization, urban development, housing, basic services, national urban policies, regulatory systems, slum upgrading, social inclusion. So we have a whole range of water, sanitation, basic services, mobility, energy. So anything that really relates to the broad field of sustainable urbanization. We develop norms and standards and tools and guidance for national governments, local governments, and other actors. But we also help implement the same at the local level in communities around the world. And this is just an indication of our global footprint. We also do a lot of data collection and research, a lot of analysis around these issues, and a lot of advocacy at global platforms, constantly asking for just solutions and inclusive cities and sustainable cities, etc. I wanted to just touch upon a few of the types of impacts that we have with our work, and this is just a little bit of a sampler of, because water and sanitation is one part of our work. It's not the whole picture, but just as an example, over the last decade, we've helped maybe about 55-60 million people have greater access to water services. And I like the one water phrase that was just used, all the way from drinking water to stormwater to sewage. And 30, 40, 50 cities, a number of cities around the world working with us to develop climate resilience, climate adaptation plans. Water is a very big part of those plans. 68 cities around the world working with us to develop better solid waste management. Again, very strong linkage with water systems, and a number of cities, increasing number of cities now coming to work with us on developing nature-based solutions. And this is where I will segue into the substance of this nexus between climate change, urbanization, and nature-based solutions. We know the challenges. We just heard Carey talk about it. Climate change is here to stay. Already at this point, 3.5 billion people are considered highly vulnerable to climate change around the world. 55%, 56% of the world is urban. which means about 4.5 billion people live in cities. 500 million of those live in coastal urban areas. 25 of the world's megacities are around coastlines and are at very high risk of sea level rise as well as flooding, which they face. Or, 2/3 of the world will be living in urban areas by 2050. And of course, climate change is both caused in some way by urbanization, with greenhouse gas emissions coming from buildings and from transport and from industrialization. But cities and communities, urban communities, also bear the brunt of climate change. And these are the kinds of impacts that they see. We're seeing increased flooding in urban areas, particularly in the coastal zones that I mentioned. We have 2.2 billion people already around the world without safe water. We have at least 350 million more at the way we are going to be exposed to water scarcity. And 1/3 of the world's major cities may run out of water by 2050. You may have heard of the story of Cape Town, which was the first city around the world, in South Africa, to run out of water. You may not have heard of the city of Bengaluru in India, which ran out of water last week. So it's real, and it's expanding, and it's going to hit home to all of us very, very quickly. But even without climate change, urbanization also has an impact on our water systems. We're looking at the way infrastructure is obviously the way infrastructure is created, the kinds of construction materials that are used. We build over natural water channels typically. We have a lot of urbanization is unplanned. A lot of it is encroachment. A lot of it just means that we block the natural water systems all the time. And we are basically looking at flood hazards increasing 2.5 times, drought hazards doubling, and urban land which is exposed to floods and droughts will increase more than 2.5 times. Again, leading to food insecurity, water insecurity around the world. And I need not tell you that that is going to be the next round of conflicts that we're going to see around the world as well. We're seeing more and more people moving from rural to urban areas because of the push, because of droughts, because of inability to grow food and sustain themselves. But they come to cities, and cities are again not equipped to take those people in. And that's where the challenges get compounded. So when you bring all of this together, you're really looking at a combination of human loss, infrastructure damage, economic loss, as well as greater health burdens. And on the health piece, I was just at this meeting yesterday at the Perry World House on vector-borne diseases, and we're looking at all the waterborne diseases. We're looking at malaria, we're looking at dengue, we're looking at cholera, we're looking at all of those. And where do they come? Where do we see the maximum impact? Where we have a water challenge, where we have flooding, where we have inadequate drainage, where we have poor water management and poor water and sanitation systems. So that's really the place where we are. But the challenge is that, you're faced with such a massive, massive scale of the problem. Where do you start? And for the UN, it's extremely important that we focus on the most vulnerable. The most vulnerable communities, the people who are most at risk of being left behind. And these are people who live in informal settlements, in poor quality housing. In the global south, they live in slums, or in Latin America, they're called favelas, or they live in, extremely marginalized, peri-urban, unplanned communities without infrastructure, without access to basic services. These are the people we need to focus on. These are the communities we need to focus on if we are to build water resilience for everyone around the world. Then in addition, there are other compounding factors, children, the homeless, women-headed households, those who are otherwise vulnerable and not able, those who work in the informal sector, those who do not have regular jobs, those who work in precarious sort of economic sectors, those are the ones that are most vulnerable. Even if they have a shelter today, they're at least at risk of being thrown out tomorrow, or their water being cut off because they're not being able to pay the bills, etc. So these are really the communities that we need to, the most affected population groups that we need to focus our attention on. Where do nature-based solutions come into this whole equation? And I think that's something that I'm going to talk about through a set of examples, 3 examples that I will share with you. UN Habitat projects in different stages of development. The first one has been implemented. The other 2 are being implemented as we speak. But really stepping back, what are nature-based solutions? There are complicated definitions in literature, but fundamentally, solutions to complex challenges that benefit both people and nature. That's just it. Let's just remember that as the bottom line, that it is something that we do which is not at the cost of nature and which benefits both the human settlement, the communities, people, and nature at the same time. And this is really about focusing our attention on ecosystems and managing them better. The potential of nature-based solutions has been acknowledged by the literature, by IUCN, and by the literature around the whole climate discussion, that 1/3 of climate mitigation that is needed to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement can be provided through nature-based solutions. So really the potential is huge. But as I was just saying to someone outside when we were having a chat, it's really about the political will, isn't it? It's really about courage. It's really about having the courage and the ability to take a decision and to start a process which turns a system inside out, upside down, and which questions conventional wisdom and perhaps goes against established law and norm, to say, no, we're going to do it differently. And there are some cities around the world which have done this differently. The first project I'm going to talk about has been implemented in Jordan, in Amman, the capital of Jordan. It comes from the Middle East. It's an arid country, but flash floods are their big problem. It's very dry, but rainfall patterns are unpredictable, and they are not prepared when it comes to a lot of water in a very short space of time. That's what happens when you have a flash flood. They've had a lot of unplanned urbanization. You see the density there, and the city has had a lot of challenges with flash floods recently. In 2018 particularly, they had a massive flash flood that led to a number of lives being lost, private properties being damaged, infrastructure being damaged, and in response to that, they invited UN Habitat to come and support them to do something there. And we conducted a whole flood risk assessment and hazard mapping study of downtown Amman, and identified a number of hot spots which were very vulnerable, but also acupuncture spots where we could start implementing solutions that could be most impactful with a very short and quick intervention time with a low budget, always. So what we implemented was what is called the Al-Zahur green triangle, and this is what it looked like. So, for all the engineers in the room, you would know this drawing better than I. You would understand this drawing better than I would. But really, it was about identifying a space just outside downtown Amman, which was really the place where a lot of the flash flood waters passed through and went into downtown Amman. So it was really an important strategic location, an important hotspot, as we call it, a vulnerable location, but also something that we could really address because it was a vacant piece of land that we could work with. And there we integrated, in this Al-Zahur triangle, we integrated the ideas of both stormwater detention and bioretention. So sort of being filtered down through the green area through the soft surface, permeating down, but also created a massive detention tank at the bottom, which could basically take the floodwaters and hold them and then release them slowly rather than everything coming all at once. So that was really the concept, and it was quite well implemented, and this is what it was ultimately. So it's something that's quite interesting because it also helped us involve a lot of the communities, and it became part of a larger infrastructure program which was around building resilience of vulnerable communities, particularly Syrian refugees who lived a lot around the area. And the kinds of settlements that they lived in were extremely vulnerable. When a flood hit, they were right in the path of the floodwaters, and their assets and their homes had a much greater likelihood of being damaged. So it was a combination of ecological impact as well as social impact that was achieved through this particular solution. It was a very participatory process, and ultimately has been really beneficial to the community in many different ways. Then the next one I'm going to talk about very quickly is from the city of Penang in Malaysia. And we're working in Malaysia with the city government. Penang is a state, and it has a couple of municipalities and several sub-districts. And again, flooding is a very big issue. Southeast Asia is extremely vulnerable due to the monsoons. Again, rainfall patterns are changing. They're not able to manage those. Extremely high level of urbanization, rapid urbanization, expansion of built areas. This is what the city of Penang looks like. And again, this program was triggered by a massive flood in 2017, where a number of people died, thousands were displaced, infrastructure was damaged, and the city woke up and said, okay, what can we do about it? So one of the pilots that we initiated was the sort of rehabilitation of the river, and this is called the Sungai Ara Linear Park, which is basically combining what you would call blue-green infrastructure, so river and the green space around it. I mean, it's intuitive, right? But people don't think about it all the time. They have a river and they have paved banks around it, and then they wonder why it floods. So this is really talking about creating a green space on the bank of that river, but not just any green space. It's accessible, it's a public space, it's a public park, but when the river swells, then it's able to take the overflow. And that is really the very simple logic of it. But this is just the pilot, and the idea really is to create a whole network of blue-green spaces around the city. It's really to create a network of drains, a network of parks, a network of smaller, streams that are feeding into the larger river. And then they also have a system, or they're developing upstream retention ponds, which will also allow water to be retained before it comes downstream into the river system. So we're looking at green parking spaces, we're looking at pocket parks, basically any space that can be a soft surface, it can be green, and it can be used to absorb the excess water when flooding happens. And this is what they're looking at on a district-wide scale. Finally, to my home city, which is Nairobi, in Kenya. Now, Nairobi is a very interesting city. It's a city built on hills and rivers, and even the name of the capital, Nairobi, comes from a Maasai phrase which says the place of cool waters. So it's really a confluence of 3 rivers and multiple streams, and it's really a river system. But again, the city faces a number of climate-related risks, extreme heat, flooding, regular flooding. The problem in Nairobi is the multiple informal settlements, the slums that are bordering rivers and the river system, which has basically turned them into a large open sewer system. Solid waste is dumped in these streams, liquid waste is dumped in these streams, industrial areas discharge their waste in these streams, and really this is that kind of problem where you say, gosh, where do you start? Where do you start? So again, Habitat, this is our home, and we were asked by the county government to help develop a river regeneration program. So it's really a much larger, we are in the process of developing this program, a much larger river system regeneration program. So not looking at only, starting small, but really you have to take a much more comprehensive approach to Nairobi. You have to look at the housing question, you have to look at the slums question, you have to look at basic infrastructure within slums, you have to create green spaces when people are living in extremely dense, precarious locations, and you tell them, you give up your home because I want to create a park here. I mean, it's really a very complex set of challenges that we're facing. But for us, this is a challenge which is extremely important to take up and to crack. Because otherwise, again, like many other cities of the global south, Nairobi will be completely unlivable within the next decade. So you have to solve this. So the river regeneration program that we have designed is extremely comprehensive, looks at housing, looks at services, looks at livelihoods, looks at gender, looks at social inclusion, looks at education, looks at healthcare systems. You have to really look at it in a holistic way, and this is where sort of I bring my city planner hat into the equation. That's what it looks like quite a lot of the times. So a lot of the work that we do in Nairobi is about engaging young people from communities, from slums, bringing them out for them to understand the importance of public space, the importance of keeping their communities clean, the importance of developing small micro waste management systems that link into the larger waste management system, and then taking all of that up to the city and the county administration and saying, look, communities are doing their piece, now what are you going to do about it? I'm going to close with a couple of conclusions and some reflections in terms of the priorities that we have on nature-based solutions. Really, the water resilience challenge is about so much more than water. It's about food security, it's about social cohesion, it's about access, it's about justice, it's about economic opportunities, it's about livelihoods. So it's not really, we're not just talking about a sectoral problem, we're really talking about a problem, a challenge that connects everything. That's about urban development, that's about human settlements, that's about, the planetary crisis that we face today. And we need to look at these 3 or 4 areas. That's our lessons from UN Habitat. You'll probably find others in your work. We need to look at these 4 areas as a priority for us globally. One, that we have to start identifying feasible, bankable, viable, but really still cutting-edge, novel, innovative nature-based solutions which target the most vulnerable communities. It's really about who you're targeting and how you're making sure that innovation and financing is reaching those people who are at risk of being most left behind. Linked to that, the second piece is the whole question of creating an enabling policy environment. You can do anything you want at the bottom-up grassroots level. No community wants to live in the conditions that I showed you. So they will do their utmost best to lift themselves out of that situation. But if the policy environment is not framed to help their efforts, and if the policies are regressive or not looking at, targeting or improving these approaches and getting to the most vulnerable communities, they're not going to be able to solve any problem at scale. So that's the second piece. The third is a very big challenge of financing. Climate finance globally, but all finance, generally speaking, only trickles down to the local level in a very small drip feed and a very small fraction. Most big money, we're talking about $500 billion gap that we need to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals per year. Very little of that reaches the local governments. Very little, absolutely a very minuscule portion of that actually reaches local communities. And this is because of both supply side and demand side barriers. Big banks, big institutions don't have the capacity to give money to the small community groups and small local governments. And smaller communities and local governments, even if you gave them $2 million tomorrow, do not have the capacity to absorb that money and do something with it. So really we have to work on both sides to be able to address that paradox. And ultimately, none of this works without partnerships. No government alone has ever solved, the problem of climate change, the problem of unsustainable development, the problem of poverty or inequality or lack of housing or lack of water and sanitation by themselves. So really it has to be a whole of government, whole of society, whole of community approach if we have to achieve urban resilience. Thank you, and I will leave it there.
From your projects with entities around the world, what would that information be and how would you share it? And maybe that's already happening.
Okay, so really critical information would be around impact. What is the kind of impact that we're able to have? At what cost? I think that's the, yeah, I'm loud enough. I have my teacher's voice on. So the most important information that we would share would be around impact, around the kind of investment that we're making and the kind of impact that investment is having. Because ultimately donors, decision makers, partners, governments, they all want to see really where their dollars are going and what is the human impact of that. So I think the main thing that we're trying to do in our work is to share that kind of information as widely as possible, to use it in our advocacy, and then to be able to aggregate a lot of information through data, through research, and combine these two things and be able to say, look, this is the cause and this is the effect, and this is what the funding, if it reaches the right places, can do for you. So really that's our aim.
One more question? In the back there?
Yeah, the last slide we talked about regressive policies stopping communities from kind of solving their own problems. I was just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, maybe give an example of where you could counter that.
Lots of policies, lots of different kinds of policies and regulations. We talk about property tax. We talk about which are the communities that are paying highest taxes. We talk about in the developing world, we talk about slum dwellers having to pay extremely high rates for water, which they don't get through a piped water system. Often they have to buy water off tankers, and they're actually the same tanker, the same city water is supplying water to them through tankers because they have not expanded the piped water supply system to their communities. And then the water they get through tankers is more expensive than the water they're getting through, than I am getting, for example, through my piped water supply system. So that's one example. Property taxes, taxes when you convert your property from a single family home to multiple family homes, to multiple dwelling units. We keep trying to say, very often the taxation systems and the fiscal system is not geared to really be progressive. We keep saying we want to work with densification. We keep saying we want to encourage multiple family dwelling units, in city centers, and yet those units pay a higher tax than single family homes. So you're actually you're fiscally disincentivizing people to move into apartments. So just some examples of how the policy ecosystem can often be regressive and not be geared towards change.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And the things that really stuck out to me and what you were saying, Shipra, was that the challenge is about, and I wrote this down, so much more than water. And that is so true, and that's a big part of what we're trying to figure out is how do you manage something that's so far out of just one person's purview, and how to get everyone involved. Where do you start? And the third thing you said was on your last slide, which is, who are your partners? Who are they? And how do you get them to come to the table and to provide money and support, other types of support for you while you're doing something like this? So your adventures around the world really hit home here in Philadelphia. Same kinds of different specific issues, but still very, very much generally in the same ballpark of what the big problems are. So thank you. We're now going to have 3 speakers come up, and the first one is going to be Mark Camerata. Mark is the Deputy Water Commissioner for Planning for the Philadelphia Water Department. His responsibilities include every aspect of the department's planning and environmental services, which includes sustainability, water quality and quantity modeling, wet weather compliance, flood mitigation, green and gray solutions to infrastructure problems, and stream and wetland restoration, laboratory services, and climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. So glad you found the time to come. And Mark's here going to talk to us about what's going on in Philadelphia.
Wow, that's going to be a hard presentation to follow. So that was really inspiring. Thank you. Really informative. Trying to figure out ways to kind of connect. I wish you were all at the session this morning, because I think that it was also a stage setting, not just to what Dr. Suri just provided, but I think the conversation we had this morning. And we talked a lot about challenges. We talked a lot about issues. We talked a lot about concerns. And, felt a bit negative, but I think the positive we need to take from this is, Howard, you just said, who are the partners? I mean, this room are the partners, right? This room are the folks that need to be thinking about policy, need to be thinking about ways to implement these priority actions that we just saw on that last slide. We need to create the policy environment to deal with some of the things that the stage was set at a global level that I'm going to bring down to this hyper-local level here in Philadelphia. And I wrote this down. I really liked what you said about, this audience, this group, this team, the emerging leaders that are going to be receiving some awards today, really need to be focused on the solutions to the complex challenges that benefit people and nature. So I absolutely love that, and I think that is a great stage setter here. Disclaimer, have to do it. Scale. I think what's really important when I was asked to kind of put some thoughts together, the things that jumped out to me were, what was the name of this presentation? The event? Nexus of Climate Change, Nature-Based Solutions, and CSO Remediation in the Northeast MegaRegion. I was like, oh shit, what do I do there? It's a lot of topics, and I took liberties. For those that know me, I take a lot of liberties. You're going to get a lot of content. I'm not sure I'm going to touch on any of that stuff really in detail. But what I wanted to do is just show, connection, right? Just the complexities that are out there. It's probably more issue than it is resolution. But again, I think that's what the call to action here is trying to figure out where these nexuses are. Nexus? How do you pluralize that? But really, the call to action here is how do we start to think about policy and prioritization that really address what we're seeing. So I just wanted to touch on scale a little bit, and I took a couple cracks at that. A lot of folks talk about their infrastructure. So working for the water department, 7,000 miles of pipe, 6 treatment plants, 3 on the water side, 3 on the wastewater side, pump stations everywhere, massively, just a lot of infrastructure. Probably have New York colleagues here, which is dwarfed by the numbers, that I'm sharing here. But one of the things too, from a scaling, is the map here that Philadelphia sits at the bottom of a very large watershed. And I know to touch on the Mid-Atlantic MegaRegion, I had to show obviously the region that is upstream of us here in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia owns 2% of the land area in which are the source water, the the water above us, right? The land area that provides drinking water to 1.6 million people in this region. So just kind of getting that scale out. Scale of infrastructure, scale of the geography of the land area that impacts, what we do here. More scale of infrastructure, distributed infrastructure throughout the city. Obviously, stormwater, so bringing down to a hyper-local scale, and I'll get a little bit into green infrastructure. But our job here, my privilege to lead a planning department is to think about integration, is to think about how do we manage all these responsibilities, how do we think about providing services today while also focused on tomorrow. And another way to kind of introduce scale. We're a core service provider, right? We provide drinking water, we treat wastewater, we manage stormwater for 1.6 million people. But I always show this slide. This will be in every presentation I give for the rest of my career. We know what we need to do, but if you don't have the value proposition of how you're supposed to do it and why you need to do it, then it doesn't matter what your responsibilities are. So I focus on the second part of our mission here, which highlights these words about being customer focused, thinking about services in a fair and equitable way, constantly thinking about cost effectiveness, a commitment to meaningful and inclusive public involvement, knowing our role in the economic development for the city, while thinking about not just what we do from an environmental stewardship, but how do we leave a legacy of environmental stewardship. Along the lines of continued scale here, this is not new to us, right? We've been providing these services for 200 years. We need to hopefully do it for 200 more. We've always been committed to a planning approach that respects integration, that thinks long-term, that thinks watershed-wide. So these are just the requirements. We protect our source water. We're focused on stream and habitat improvement. We manage stormwater, not just in a combined area to separate sewered area, but we do it with stakeholders, and we do it with, constantly thinking about future regulations. My text box there got a little screwy. But I wanted to focus a little bit on the future regulations, which you'll see later on. And again, more scale, understanding your region, thinking about, the mega region here. We think basin scale from drinking water. We think about the river reach scale for how we manage the hyper-local drinking water supply and how the effects of our stormwater and wastewater treatment affect the river scale, tributary-wide as well. Sewer shed scale when we think about CSO mitigation, green application, and project scale, obviously at the very hyper-local scale when we think about projects, whether it's a rain barrel to a green roof to a linear asset in front of your street. I show this again from a scale. This is our 5-year capital budget. We spent $4.5 billion to try to invest in the assets necessary to deliver on those core services that we provide. Again, just a breakdown. It's not here to flex in any stretch of the imagination. It's trying to just contextualize the amount of money we need to spend to provide the services that we do. And you think capital, right? And it's, I can go get capital. I go to the bond market. I submit some applications, maybe get some grants, get some loans. But when you think about what that means from a rate impact, we pay that money back, right? We raise rates every single year. And not only are we spending $700 million next year on capital, but we're also going to be spending almost $850 million in operating. So that's to pay for the people. That's to pay for all the other maintenance, operations, chemicals, equipment, all the things we do to kind of operate the assets that we end up building. So again, from a scale standpoint, we raise rates, we ask for money or increase rates. We never get what we ask for. We got to figure out what needs to be scaled back because we didn't get the rates that are commensurate. I have to talk about our Combined Sewer Overflow program, right? That was in the major theme of the presentation here. We get a lot of airtime on Green City Clean Waters, right? This was our 25-year plan for mitigating the effects of combined sewer overflow. We're 13 years into the program right now, 12 more years to go, a lot of work to be done. And, we get a lot of attention on the green infrastructure elements behind it. But the idea is to basically mitigate or eliminate about 9 billion gallons of overflow of our about 8 billion gallons of overflow of about 13.5 billion gallons that were our starting point years ago. We have a bunch of different elements. It's not just green infrastructure, as you're probably aware or may not be. We're making major investments in our treatment plants to enhance them for additional wet weather flow. So increasing capacity, increasing redundancy, increasing the ability to deal with effluent pumping for when we send drastic water there. So obviously looking at what's in our fence line now and continuing to make investments in these fixed assets and these large-scale assets to continue to deliver and drive water quality improvements through treatment technology. We also make modifications to the collection system. So how do we deliver more flow to the plant? How do we optimize what stays in the system as opposed to sneaking out throughout the many locations? So we're looking at pump station modifications, transmission improvements, just in-system storage, just a ton of stuff in the collection system. I believe Michael's going to go into a lot more detail on green infrastructure, and Dr. Suri laid out a few projects. I just want to focus on the diversity of the toolbox when we think about nature-based infrastructure, sustainable urban drainage systems, you name it, best management practices back in the day, low-impact development. But interception, infiltration, evaporation, transpiration, harvest and reuse, slow release, all these need to be part of the toolbox to think about how you implement green infrastructure at scale to manage stormwater, to alleviate the stress on the system that causes combined sewer overflow and ultimately improves water quality. How do we deliver thousands and thousands of projects and thousands of green acres and hopefully eliminate many billions of gallons of CSO overflow using these tools? Well, it's 3 different approaches. We touched a little bit on this morning. Modifications to our land have caused major impacts on our water. It's a very obvious statement, but what do you do to continue or to prevent that issue to keep, from keep on happening in the city? Well, you regulate development in the city, and you institute stormwater regulations that basically say if you touch the land in this city, you have to manage it now from a water quality, channel protection, flood protection requirement. We now require stormwater be managed through all new development in the city. You need a tool that takes into account the existing land, right? And the effect that you understand that existing impervious cover has on your system, and you incentivize some retrofit. So we instituted a stormwater fee, and we married that with a crediting program that allows you, if you manage stormwater and change the way that your existing land impacts our system, you can actually get a fee reduction. We incentivize that with a competitive grant program to kickstart those projects even more. Then you take direct public investment, ratepayer dollar, and you invest in critical locations throughout the city to maximize stormwater runoff. And we do that in public lands like green streets and parks and libraries and rec centers. And this is the last slide you're going to see on our CSO program before I jump into numerous other things. But this is what we've been doing for 13 years. And when I say we, the 1,000 people or so in the city, professional service providers, maintenance providers, vendors, civil service staff, our regulatory agencies, academic communities, nonprofits, advocates, you name it, have all been part of delivering the dots that are smattered on this screen here. We've had over 3,000 greened acres on our way to 10,000 in the first 12 years just in the combined sewage system, with another 500 or so greened acres in the separate sewage section of the city. In addition, we have many other hyper local rain check installations, which are rain barrels, rain gardens, downspout disconnects, and porous pavement removal at the house scale. So all these represent applications of stormwater management practices using any of those green infrastructure practices we talked about that infiltrate, evaporate, harvest, reuse, store, you name it, transpire throughout the city. I bring this slide up because, and it's not, I wasn't able to modify the color scheme here, but we're 13 years in, we're on our way to our year 15 performance standard as part of our regulatory obligation, on our way to 25. We have a lot more work to be done. But I raise the question here of, we have to do evaluation and adaptation planning every 5 years. We're two or so years away from evaluating the success of the program, how we will meet our year 15 targets, but any adaptation that may be necessary to continue to put projects and plans in place to get us to year 20 and get us to year 25. I could say we have over 2,500 greened acres in planning and design, some under construction right now, so we're still on our way up that curve. And we have another, about 12 projects of the traditional variety that will trim off another 1 billion gallons of combined sewer overflow to get us closer to the volume targets. But I wanted to raise, it looks like all my red obnoxious text boxes got trimmed here. But what I wanted to raise is, so we have an adaptation obligation, but I also wanted to bring up kind of the integrated planning obligation that we have as well, and the opportunity that we have, as was prescribed in the 2019 amendments to the Clean Water Act, that almost require or give you a massive opportunity for us to think about integrated planning and integrated responsibilities. And I want to add to that integrated affordability, because I think what you'll see on this rapid succession of next slides is it's not necessarily just about trying to find the touch points and how do you make the best out of one or two things. It's how do you actually deliver on all the obligations, requirements, and necessities that we have with a severely limited affordability or severely limited ability to pay here in the city, given our 25% of our poverty below 25% of our population below the federal poverty line here in Philadelphia. I'm going to go through a lot of this. We don't have time to go into it, but again, it's just trying to scale again. We talked about green infrastructure. We talked about stormwater management. We do it for our Combined Sewer Overflow program, but that's only 60% of the land area in the city. We're negotiating the terms of a municipal separate storm sewer permit for the other 40 square miles, or 40% of the land area in the city, that generates uncontrolled stormwater runoff to our rivers and streams. And I highlight one of the requirements that causes a little bit of concern at this point is an expectation of a pollutant reduction plan that's going to have us almost put together a Green City Clean Waters type program in a 5-year permit increment. That's the scale of the pollutant reduction and the calculation that's being proposed in the permit right now to try to figure out a way to mitigate water or manage the sediment or the pollutant loading associated with what's coming off our MS4 area. Aging infrastructure. Obviously, anytime we have a collapse, a break, or something crazy, it gets a lot of attention. And I show this again to put it in scale, that when you have 3,000 miles of water mains, and they're at an age where we're looking at 20% of them are before 1900 when they were installed, about 80% of it not too far out of the just over year 1900. The average age of our infrastructure in this city is about 75 years, and the transmission lines, which are like the major arteries of providing water throughout the city, is creeping up on 90 years. So massively aging infrastructure. You look at the sewer side, another 3,000 miles of sewer, and you look at the age of those assets as well, and it begs the question of when is your infrastructure coming of age, and are you investing in it appropriately while you're balancing all these other responsibilities? We had our session this morning, and I thought it was really interesting because it was a prioritization slide, and what was not on that slide, and maybe it was so obvious, or maybe it's just because we've all gotten used to the fact that we think drinking water is a right, and it needs to be there, and it will be there, regardless of what happens. But providing safe, reliable, and plentiful drinking water for 1.6 million people takes a massive amount of investment. And we've been looking at a drinking water revitalization plan to invest in 10 key projects. I know it says 400, but it's 10 critical projects over the next 25 years that will continue to think about water quality, operability, water quantity, service pressure, to make sure that we're providing safe, reliable, plentiful drinking water for the next 25 years or so. So a massive influx of investment at 10 critical locations on treatment, pumping, and transmission throughout the city. We're doing the same thing on our wastewater side of the organization. So looking at our 3 wastewater treatment plants and thinking about the impacts of climate, like sea level rise, thinking about nutrient management requirements that we're seeing, thinking about asset age, and future leverage and connection with our consent order or our combined sewer overflow obligations that we see. I fully expect this to be another multi-billion-dollar investment that is yet unplanned and not factored into our funding. Let's not forget, again, about our source water protection programs. The success we've had to date by leveraging partners upstream, working with the Schuylkill River Greenways, with the Schuylkill River Restoration Fund, other private water utilities, the USDA, numerous other organizations to continue to invest in projects outside of the jurisdiction of Philadelphia to protect our drinking water protection, our source water protection program. We're always thinking, again, not just about policy, but how we're dealing with flow management. What happens upstream in New York and their releases and how we manage the water supply affects us, how we repel the salt line that could be creeping up during increased periods of drought in the future. We are not prepared for managing salinity intrusion in our drinking water treatment plants. We will be considering that in our drinking water revitalization and our plant upgrades, but right now we're not prepared for that. So keeping that in mind, along with all these other regulations and emerging contaminants. We are a major user of energy, and we're trying to meet citywide energy goals as well, as far as carbon neutrality by 2050. We originally were 50 by 30, 50% greenhouse gas reduction by 30, and now the city looks like we're moving to our 100 by 50. It's a lofty goal, and it's going to be an extreme challenge for someone who uses a lot of energy. We talked about climate change. I'm going to focus more on flooding and heat stress. I show this only because, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, we are bound by increasing sea level rise, increasing precipitation. We're getting more rain, more intense periods of rain. We're getting a warmer environment. We're seeing storm surge and sea level rise that's kind of unprecedented and unparalleled in some coastal areas. And we need to factor that into how we think about water quality impacts, how we think about inundation for protecting our assets, how that's going to impact increased stormwater runoff, and just, again, continuing to impact drinking water quality, but even more so, or not even more so, in addition to the health and safety of our workforce during days of water temperature, knowing that about 60% of our workforce are field workers that will be impacted by a changing climate. How do we take that vulnerability and that risk and turn it into real images? Well, we take photos of areas like Eastwick that are seeing this kind of flooding, and we show a little alignment for a tunnel in the Germantown section, which is one of our probably lowest income communities in the city that have had repetitive flooding for decades now. So we're thinking about a dual purpose CSO mitigation, flood mitigation tunnel. I show this, and I have about 2 more minutes. I may go a little bit over time here. But so the obvious here is obviously a lot of regulatory requirements that exist now, ones that we're seeing coming at us, climate change impacts, aging infrastructure. The balance is already tipped, right? We want to meet fishable, swimmable, drinkable, safe drinking water, clean water Act responsibilities, but also doing it, and Howard kind of originally drove this into the organization when he was with us, the safe, attractive, accessible, just, affordable premises. It's getting harder to do when things like this are falling in our lap. We have the lead and copper rule improvements dropped in December. We have aquatic life use, a nutrient management requirement that dropped in December. And we just saw yesterday the PFAS drinking water regulation that fell into our laps. All of those things were not yet in our portfolio of the $700 million a year of capital investment and the $850 million a year in operating. These are all things that need to be added to what we need to deliver for this city. I won't go into this, but there's a plethora of requirements in lead and copper. Again, I wanted to highlight, it's easy to regulate a water utility because they're there, but we don't own lead service lines. They're the private property owner, right? We don't have a single bit of lead in our system. We have optimized corrosion control. The mains in the street are lead free. The lead issue is private property, yet the water utility now needs to figure out a way to come up with $500 million to fund privately owned infrastructure replacement. We're investing in side stream treatment to deal with the nutrient management requirement that dropped. We find it to be a very cost-effective solution. We see high value in figuring out ways to deal with ammonia loading, but we're also navigating what will be a multi-billion-dollar objective to deal with what could be a very, very stringent dissolved oxygen standard on the river. PFAS yesterday, we don't need to go into it. You probably read 100 articles yesterday, but meeting a 4 parts per trillion limit at the cost that were proposed, using the technologies that were suggested in the 3 to 5 year time frame that were mentioned. Sorry, it's not going to happen without a lot of support, a lot of effort, a lot of flexibility with our regulatory agencies. And then just to touch on, we talk about PFAS in drinking water. Let's not forget that there's also going to be PFAS concerns and regulations coming for the wastewater side of the organization, which affects how we deal with biosolids. And remember, we treat waste from 1.6 million people. There's a solids handling process that will be affected and will really impact the way that we're thinking about solids management in the city, while we're getting the same kind of pressure of thinking about a swimmable water body for primary contact recreation on the same river. So all this stuff is kind of factored in here, and I try to just bring us back to full circle to the one water premise of, I know we were asked to talk about CSOs, nature-based infrastructure, but what I want to do again is just tie it into the fact that we have the responsibility of a one water agency to think about adaptation, to think about integration, to think about integrated planning, to think about not just core services, but the value we need to provide to our citizens in this much more complex wheel here of how do we make sure we're touching on all these right things. So constantly thinking about the solutions to complex challenges that benefit people and nature. And I just have to end with something successful, right? I know I laid out a lot of the challenges that are out there, but please know that you can drink your water, you can flush your toilet, you can fish in our streams, you can swim in most of them, and that we continue and have commitments to aquatic health improvements, public health, partnerships, stakeholder engagement, and still trying to deliver, the services we provide at very affordable rates. So, thank you.
We have time for one question. I see a hand back there. Yeah, it's you.
So you talked a little bit at the end about sort of integrated planning, and obviously the benefits of nature-based solutions are widespread beyond water into like heat island and air quality, biodiversity, public health. How is the Philadelphia Water Department collaborating with other departments and offices to try to align on these shared goals?
Great question. Partnerships are easy to say. They're hard to form. and once you form them, they're hard to deliver kind of the shared outcomes that you expect. I'll just focus on green infrastructure. I think that's the easiest one to kind of talk about partnerships. I mentioned a little bit of all the agencies and the entities that need to be with you hand in hand. We can talk about partnerships with academic institutions, whether it's for research on technologies or performance benefits. We can talk about partnerships with Parks and Recreation for how we need to cite practices on public property that jive with the recreation elements that Parks and Rec want to do. We need to work with the streets department. Anytime, obviously, we cite infrastructure in the street to coordinate streets repaving, utility, conflict, tree plantings, whether it's with the Horticultural Society or any other tree tenders programs. The development community, when we regulate, right, stormwater management on private, we need to do that hand in hand. We have a review process that we work with the development community to make sure that we're not holding up the development process. Time is money in the development world. So how are we ensuring that they're meeting stormwater regulations, but also moving forward with their development? The equipment and vendor provider community, the construction community that delivers a lot of these assets. Everything we do as far as delivering assets, particularly non-traditional, surface-based, distributed, natural, practices, there's partnerships throughout the entire delivery system here, from construction to planning, community involvement to working with advocates. So partnerships in the green infrastructure world, again, we've committed to that over the last 15 years, and our job now is to figure out how to take those touch points, those communication, those kind of benefits and experience that we've had delivering those assets, to now expand it to the other portfolio of work that we need to do, whether we move into kind of lead service line replacements or some of these other massive investments we need to make throughout the city and the region.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. There will be more time for questions and answers after we finish the presentations, and so please stay around. And Mark, I thought that you said that we finished everything. Everything's working.
We got another
You guys
100
have
years
doubled. You guys have doubled the capital budget. Wow. Anyway, that was very, very impressive. Thank you. Our next speaker is Michael Sachs, and Michael is the Northeast General Manager for a company called Resource Environmental Solutions, otherwise known as RES. He has more than 16 years of experience in stormwater management, urban challenges, civil site design, erosion and sediment control, natural channel design, hydrologic and hydraulic analysis, and design. And with that, Michael, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Where am I? Okay. There we go. That's what I look like. Look at my hair in that picture, actually. Never mind that picture. I used to have a hair color. So how long do I have? What would be preferred? 15 minutes? I can do that. So one thing I noticed with the other presentations and with the discussion this morning, Howard and the Water Center head wanted us to focus on combined sewer overflows in urban areas, and the discussion keeps getting broader and broader because I think it just is broader, and it could get even more broad. But this presentation is an adaptation of other things I've done for similar things. But I'd like to talk about solutions, funding, and I would also like to talk about case studies and examples, but I'll probably wander, like all of the other discussions today, into other things. The region that we're talking about, this Northeast MegaRegion, that's not a region I think about very often. It's not, I think, Howard, you tried to explain why that region was the focus for the center, but RES has regions, the EPA has regions, and so on and so forth. But this is where my company is located in these regions, in the Northeast MegaRegion. These are our offices. And there's two colleagues with me here today in Philadelphia. What I like about our workforce in Philadelphia, we do have a lot of different age groups. I think in a private for-profit corporation like the company I work for, RES, things evolve quickly. People come and go. It's corporate America. So I think a 10-year age gap is pretty significant. And we have myself and Ted and Joe, and we all have a 10-year age gap. And when we talk about these types of issues, we all have very different, because I think of our age, we have a very different take on some of these things. So that was just another thing I noticed a little bit in the discussions today as well. But the company I work for, RES, we work in what we used to call these markets, and this has actually changed a lot in the last few years. What we say our markets are that we serve. When this was created, the company was founded in 2008, and this marketing material that you see here was probably created in around 2010, and we were really focused on the things you see here, which were mostly mandates in terms of policy and rulemaking. These were things that were mandated, and except for corporate sustainability, which was probably very new at that time. And our work has evolved to things that are voluntary, and I think that there's more will, maybe political will, maybe community interest in nature-based solutions. I've seen it over the last 10 or 15 years, and I think this event is showing even more interest and even more evolution over the recent years in what nature-based solutions are and how they're implemented. So with that, funding. I said I would talk about funding. I'll try to talk about funding and partnerships. This is a case study that illustrates something interesting in funding. We're talking about a case study with PennDOT, and like Mark was referring to, MS4 permits and pollutant reduction mandates in the state of Pennsylvania are evolving, and the different permittees are negotiating with the state resource agency about exactly what those mandates would be and what realistically can be done under those permits. PennDOT was in that situation in 2018, and there was a good partnership with the city of Harrisburg, Capital Region Water, some municipalities around that city, and PennDOT, where they were all wrestling with the same compliance issue that was coming and how to deal with it. And at that same time, RES was working with some of those same groups, and what we suggested, we weren't the only people that suggested, I won't take credit for the idea, is pay for performance contracting. And what happened as a result of that is that private landowners, public landowners, private companies, different municipalities, they were all incentivized in a different way than they would have been in traditional design, bid, build, procurement. And that happens here in Philadelphia with the stormwater grant programs. Everybody's incentivized differently, and it does create collaboration, and in a way the funding, this pay for performance procurement, and the way that funding flows changes how people work together. So this is where one of our projects happened, and it couldn't have been a more perfect place for this to happen in the city of Harrisburg. We have the state capitol, if you're unfamiliar, and the couple of buildings you see here, it's a park and there are ball fields, but across the main boulevard is the Emergency Management Agency and the sheriff's office. The building that you see mainly in the frame is the Fish and Boat Commission headquarters for the state, and then just off the frame is the Game Commission headquarters. So pretty interesting place to do a nature-based solution. I'll have pictures of that. This is a rendering, It's done by a Pennsylvania company, Land Studies, and they're, I'd say, a pioneer in doing the floodplain restoration approach. The idea behind floodplain restoration and why it fits well with a lot of different benefits and co-benefits and goals and secondary goals for what we're talking about is because if done well and cited properly and designed properly with the right performance criteria, you could argue that it is self-sustaining, and you could argue that it is without O&M, because it's a natural system that provides ecosystem services and what we used to say functions and values before we said ecosystem services, and it does that naturally, and it will continue to do that as long as it isn't altered, modified, disturbed, and those are threats to something like this, but you can build it so that it is extremely resilient. And as an engineer, we talk about the shear stress or the velocity in the design, and a lot of times what that comes down to is the available land. So how wide a floodplain can be depends on property boundaries, and it depends on utilities and sewers, for one thing. So siting is really important, is the point I was making. I'll probably go quicker. I think I'm running long already. But cost, when we're talking about funding, we're talking about cost. You can talk about overall cost. You could talk about cost per acre, cost per gallon, what have you. In this context, it was sediment reduction, and sediment was a proxy for nutrients and other things that are associated with sediment. And these are real projects that have advertised. Well, now they're advertised, if they were not before, costs per pound of sediment reduction. And the nature-based solutions, the floodplain restoration projects are significantly less expensive. There is one in the Delaware watershed here. I won't have too much time to talk about that one. And it evolved because there was a competitive bid. Somebody bid it relatively low and wasn't able to deliver, and then it came back to the second lowest bidder, who is now delivering that still low relative to other things that you could do in terms of the actual outcome. We're being paid for performance, we're being paid for the outcome. In that case, it's sediment reduction. So more pictures about that first example, the different partners and the different, that 5,500 linear feet of stream restored, 3.5 acres of floodplain. This is actually hard to see in this picture, but 3 different locations throughout the city of Harrisburg. Some of those are in the CSO area. This is what the pre and post look like for one of them. And I am guilty of taking the worst pre-photo, post photo. I'm also guilty of aligning them so they look like they're in exactly the same reach of the stream. They may or may not be. Don't trust. Yeah, don't trust everything you see in here. Same thing here. This is one of the other examples in Harrisburg, and the last example in Harrisburg. And the Delaware Bay example is underway to be determined. We're currently looking at siting the largest of say 5 projects in the Delaware watershed in a golf course, a former golf course. And there's some work being discussed in the city here about similar to what this is on golf courses. I wanted a little bit more diversity, 5 minutes, a little bit more geographic and project type for case studies of nature-based solutions. So this is on federal land, the U.S. Air Force, and it is a shoreline stabilization project, not a floodplain restoration. But this was done also in the name of nutrient reduction. And working on federal lands is a lot of fun, and adds another stakeholder and another list of complexities, security, of course, and site access control. But this photo is also a little bit on the old side. Some of these, the idea of hard armoring our shorelines, especially in urban areas, was the standard of care. And these soft shorelines or nature-based solutions, natural shorelines are becoming the better way of doing this. And this one's actually dated. This isn't exactly how we do it today. This is less dated. Bell Island State Park, and also in Virginia. And another example of what these look like with all the different co-benefits. But again, this one was in the name of nutrient reduction, as are a lot of the others. So a summary, what was I was to talk about funding. I think I did. Case studies, got that covered, about out of time. The most important thing, if we're talking about pay for performance and we're talking about the way that private companies behave, private landowners behave, public agencies behave, it can be altered a little bit by how you procure and how you measure the outcome. So that's what I would advocate for in this case, and that's what these case studies are about. The best use of the available funding sometimes is to just pay for exactly the outcome you want. You may give up some control over exactly what you get and where you get it and where it's sited. The pollutant reduction plans had other projects contemplated. When this became a competitive bid, the bidders found sites that were available, that were cost effective, that produced the outcome that they were looking for, and all these other outcomes, habitat for one. And they weren't exactly where you would expect them to be, but because of the way that this was procured, and it made the best use of the funding that was available. And it also got people to work together in different types of organizations. So that's what I would hope you take away from that case study.
Is there one question? Yes. Right, yes.
Yeah, in those examples that you gave, would you have a rough estimate of how much of the money was spent on the gray part of the engineering and construction, and how much of it was the green bio-based component?
It's going to vary depending on the situation. One thing that I would say is that acquiring the land is a cost in a lot of these cases. Not every landowner had intended this to be their land use, and you have to acquire the land. The costs are numerous and in numerous different categories. There's the soft cost, the design, the engineering, the permitting. There's the hard cost, the construction, the materials. There's also operations and maintenance and some financial assurances. The cost of bonding the project, and then the cost of finding a long-term steward who can take care of it for a pretty long time that's required in these bids. But I don't know that I answered your question too directly. Maybe indirectly that's a good answer.
There was a mention in a previous presentation that about a third of the solution to the goals can be provided with green nature-based solutions.
Okay.
And I'm trying to understand if this is realistic, because as practitioners, what we're seeing is that only a fraction of the funds actually end up on the green and the bio side, and most of the money does get spent on the upfront cost, the legal, construction, engineering, and all that.
I will say that you reduce, when you do the procurement in this pay-for-performance manner, you have to spend time developing the program and creating the rules of the program, but then there is much less administration because you award the project, and it's really one contractor, one service provider, one contract. So there's a lot less administration and a lot less layers of administration versus traditional design, bid, build. I don't have any more information to answer your question other than that, though.
Thank you, Mike. And there'll be more time for our audience questions after we get through the program. So keep in mind if you want to ask some more later. Our third and final presentation is by Franco Montalto, who's an old friend of mine, who is a civil engineer, a PhD civil engineer, and he focuses on triple bottom line solutions to the types of problems that we've been looking at. He's a professor at Drexel University. He directs the Sustainable Water Resource Engineering Lab. He does a lot with green infrastructure, low impact development, research and design of a variety of nature-based solutions. ecological restoration, constructed wetlands, and so many other things. So please come on down and let's give a hand to Franca.
Sorry, see if I can do this in front of a group of people without.
He's a real professor because he knows how to just put the make it go.
Sorry, it's embarrassing. Yeah, I had a PhD dissertation right before this, so I'm a little bit frazzled. But thanks for the invitation to present here. Yes, I am an engineer. I'm a practitioner as well as a researcher. A lot of what I've been thinking about lately has to do with flooding. I was part of the New York City panel on climate change. I was the co-lead of the flooding working group, which is going to be issuing the first ever report on flooding in New York City next month. And so this sort of transition from thinking about green infrastructure to thinking about flooding and where nature-based solutions fit in the middle is like a big part of what I've been talking about. So I have sort of 3 key points that I want to make along those lines. I was asked to sort of talk a little bit about this region and the climate risks that we face specifically from a water perspective, and so I'll talk about that, and I'll talk specifically about the burden that climate change presents on existing drainage systems, which, as we'll hear about, were not designed to deal with these sort of extreme conditions that we're facing. And there's a lot of research out there that's saying that our efforts to update that infrastructure, our efforts to adapt nationally, globally, everywhere, need to move faster. And so that's a big part of what I'm thinking about. So that's my first sort of point. The second point is that a lot of the tools that we in the practitioner community, in the design community, in the planning community have been using to think about pollutant loads can be adapted to think about some of these new risks, but there are some sort of strategic changes that need to be made to those tools. You can't just jump from planning CSO reductions to planning flood risk reduction measures. So I'll talk just a little bit about some of the tools that I've been using in my own work. And then again, eventually sort of conclude with the fact that I think we need a sort of hybrid, all of the above, multi-pronged approach if we're going to address, as we heard from Mark, all these issues that are coming at us at the same time. And that includes just immediate incremental things that we can do, and then these sort of long-term thinking. So just to get out of the way what Ellen asked me to talk about with climate change, so precipitation, and of course you can tell the region is getting wetter overall, and there's a lot of researchers that are out there trying to tell you how much wetter it's getting. I was one of the authors of the Northeast chapter of the National Climate Assessment, and there was a lot of discussion about how much wetter are we getting. If you look at it on a daily scale, you've heard this before, but our region of the United States, the days with heavy precipitation, days meaning days, that's daily precipitation, has increased by 60%. In the last numerous decades, and also if you look at days with precipitation amounts that exceed certain thresholds, like 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, there was a lot of thought that went into this graphic that's in the Northeast chapter that looks at a sort of pooled number of observations, and we see that these days of extreme precipitation are increasing. I keep on emphasizing days because if you work on flooding like I do, you know that we don't necessarily need days. We need to know on the order of minutes, right? Some of these really extreme precipitation events that are occurring are a massive downpour that happens in a very small amount of time, and we simply don't have that fine temporal resolution data for a long enough period of time to tell us what the trends are in this sort of really fine sort of short duration precipitation events, and that's a key challenge that we face. But I think the point is that the extreme precipitation amounts, so the PX, exceeds the water quality volume that we've traditionally used to design our infrastructure. And here, this is a graphic that will be in this forthcoming flooding report that just shows in New York City, for example, the design rainfall that's used for various site connection permits, and it's similar in Philadelphia and in many other cities, 1.5, 1.85 inches. And then these graphics, these curves, are cumulative amounts of precipitation. So the horizontal axis is time and the vertical axis is cumulative inches of precipitation. And to produce these graphics, I got the 1-minute data for these events. And you can see the steeper the curves, the more intense. So there's some really steep events that have occurred. But you can also see where they sort of plateau, which is the total amount of precipitation, way above the amounts of precipitation that we are thinking about when we're designing a bioretention practice or a cistern or some type of green infrastructure or stormwater management practice. So that's just a key thing to keep in mind, that the types of events that are coming at us are much bigger than the types of events that we're used to think about pollutant reduction, you know, the water quality volume, the first flush, the 90th percentile storm. Then we can talk about sea level rise, and you know, there's this term relative sea level rise, which sort of looks at the increase in sea level and the change in vertical motion of the land. And so local rates depend. It depends on what you select as your base period. It depends on the amount of vertical land motion that you might have in a specific place. It depends on, if you're looking forward in time, the emissions scenarios and the global climate models that you use. But these two graphics here are for a report that we, CC Run, which is a consortium of universities that I'm part of, issued for Philadelphia. And what you have here are different decades and different percentiles. The percentiles aren't risk-based percentiles. They're just, if you look at the different scenarios, the different climate models that are out there, the different emission scenarios, there's a sort of a range. And this is the graphic that's coming out in the climate sciences report, also forthcoming from NPCC. And you know, we're sort of in this range of probably by the end of century, you could have something up to about 4 feet of sea level rise, depending on where you land in these percentiles. But a lot of the planning projects that I'm in lately are using this sort of 4-foot end of century number. I just stuck in this graphic just to show how difficult it is sometimes to compare between locations. This is from Baltimore. This is a VIM study. And they're telling you the change in mean sea level from 1992 and projecting that by 2050 it's about 0.5 meter. So it really depends a lot where you are locally. Sea level rise is impacting both urban infrastructure and coastal ecosystems. And so we're talking about nature-based solutions. So I wanted to talk about both of those individually using graphics from some of these forthcoming reports. So this is from the New York City Panel on Climate Change report. This one just shows, I think, really interestingly, how an increase in sea level can result in an increase in water table in coastal areas, which can then cause water tables to actually intersect with subsurface infrastructure. It could be infiltration into pipes. It could be subway tunnels. It could be basements. It then makes it much more difficult for precipitation that's trying to infiltrate into the ground or flow over land to leave. And on the ecological side, this is the graphic from the Northeast chapter of National Climate Assessment that just looks at how water table going up over time from the top being present day to 2060 to 2100. As that water table goes up, you can see that it's intersecting with the roots of vegetation in coastal zones and then changing both because of saline intrusion and because of differences in waterlogging and hydro period. It's changing the vegetation composition there in ways that are difficult to plan for. We flood for lots of different reasons, and I think a lot of times people say just stop the flooding, but they're not thinking sort of strategically about what type of flooding you're trying to address. And it's really important to think about the difference between pluvial flooding, for example, which is when you have this high intensity rain that can't get into the ground or can't get into a pipe and therefore pools on the surface, which is fundamentally different from fluvial flooding, which is when the base flow of a stream overtops its banks. And those are the flood maps that we typically talk about, the 100-year stream flow. But those aren't looking at the pluvial flood risks, which could be in a much larger area and are in a much larger area, as we see in New York City with the recently released stormwater resiliency flood maps that just show the pluvial flood risks and how spatially pervasive they are in the city. Coastal flooding, when you have sea level rise or you have surges pushing against the coast, it makes it more difficult for the water to leave. And as I just talked about, the groundwater flooding. So together, these two changes, precipitation and sea level rise, really create challenges in all types of these flooding, and they're compounding. So the sort of overlap of all of these together. And legacy infrastructure was really not designed to deal with this. So now let me shift to the second part of what I wanted to talk about, which, 5 minutes, okay. Using existing tools to make decisions for the future. So this is just an image of Camden's long-term control plan hydrologic and hydraulic model that they use for planning CSOs. And you can see, because the goal was to cover the whole service area, there's fairly coarse resolution. And if you zoom in at one of the way that model addresses one of the most flood-prone communities in Camden, Kramer Hill, you see the level of resolution that's used in these models. And this is that red dot. I took this picture during a 2021 event at that location. So you can't use that model to simulate that type of an event or solutions for reducing it. You need to do a lot of, these existing H&H models that we've been using for sort of green infrastructure planning lack the granularity to predict flooding. And so you need to do a lot more to update those models to add to them two-dimensional surfaces, add them obstructions, and then we need to think about the historical ways that we made sure these models made sense by looking at the flow in the sewer system. But we also need to get better data about flooding on the surface so that we can validate the surface flooding. And this is a nationwide problem. We don't have very good data on flooding. And as a result of that, it becomes difficult to validate these types of models. And there's all kinds of interesting things happening now in the space of flood measurements in New York City, FloodNet NYC, lots of interesting stuff happening with images and other cameras and other things. So traditional stormwater management strategies, they need to be scaled up if we want to address future flood risks. And we already heard a little bit about Eastwick. This is a place where I've been working for a while in southwest Philadelphia. This is a busy graph, but it basically shows the stage on Cobb's Creek, and you can see those vertical lines, the stage at which, so below 15 feet, there's no flood risk. Between 15 and sort of 15.8, the creek overflows, but it doesn't hit the buildings. And then above that, you get increasing amount of risks to the buildings in that community. And what's interesting, these different lines here come from some modeling that we did to look at the upstream watershed. And if you look at the sort of at most, what's currently being discussed by the municipalities, it's that amount of stormwater management happening there, which is nowhere near the amount that you would need. And it just sort of drives home this point that existing stormwater management that's being done for pollutant reduction is not going to get you where you need to go, which is something like this, if you want to use those types of approaches to addressing flooding. I have one other little example here. This is some work that I've been doing with CCMUA in Camden, where we've been looking at a specific area of Harrison Avenue that floods regularly. And we've come up with some really interesting solutions there of how you can adjust the sewer system to actually remove the flooding, to actually eliminate the flooding on that one particular section of the street. But and this is also, I want to just a credit to Scott Schreiber from CCMUA. The work that we're doing there is also including a 50% increase in precipitation to account for climate change. But the problem is that if you look at just NOAA's sea level rise viewer and you look at that very same street, what you see is that as the sea level, as the Delaware River level goes up, eventually, even though you're doing these innovative things to address the pluvial flood risk, you will get swamped by the coastal flood risk. And so we need to be eventually thinking about these multiple types of flood risks. So I have just two more slides here really quickly. I want to say from the perspective of nature-based solutions, of course, some of the problems that we have to do with the history of development. So this is also from this soon-to-come-out flooding chapter, and it just shows sort of development state. If you think of a pre-development condition, we would have had a certain flood risk, right? Natural systems flood always. And even if you had climate change in a natural system, there would be some increase in that risk, and I would call that sort of an unavoidable flood risk. But then you superimpose on top of that all of the urbanization that we've had, and you see a much higher flood risk, and you see climate change having an even greater impact on that. And I would call that unacceptable. But then there's a really interesting set of discussions that we need to have about where we want to go from here. So what is the future acceptable flood risk, and what are the trajectories or the alternative adaptation pathways that we might think about to get there? And I think that's a really interesting set of conversations that involves not just the governmental stakeholders, but also the community-based stakeholders, practitioners, and everybody else who's involved in this type of work. And I don't have time to talk about it, but there's all kinds of solutions that we can overlay on top of one another to address this. But I want to just sort of end with, are we having the right conversations? And I think, one of the things that I hear a lot about is like, well, nature-based solutions are going to solve these problems, but we have to think about what we can reasonably expect from nature-based solutions given the scale of the risks that we're facing. So, for example, coastal wetlands need to be high, wide, and continuous if you want them to reduce storm surges. So the literature out there is between 1 and 15 inches of storm surge reduction per mile of wetland. So if you're talking about a storm surge that's of a foot in height, you need a whole lot of wetlands in order to rely exclusively on wetlands to reduce that surge. And similarly, green infrastructure practices, as we just talked about, need to be scaled up. They need to be more hydraulically efficient. We need to come up with more creative ways of figuring out how to integrate them into the urban matrix if we want them to be part of the solution. And managed retreat, this idea that we can move people away from high-risk areas, is easier to say, but in practice, these are real communities where real people have raised their families and lived for long periods of time. And so to do managed retreat in an equitable manner is, I think, much more challenging than the public conversation around it would bear right now. And so I think this conversation is only just beginning, and the partners in the room and others, this is going to be a big part of what we're talking about for the rest of our careers.
So everybody else got one question, Franco? One question? Yes, thank you, that's what I wanted to say.
I don't have a question, I just want to mention some of the things you were talking about, like about future stormwater capacity needs. So I'm from New Jersey, and New Jersey's always like the stepchild between Philadelphia and New York. But there are new regulations, inland flood rules, that are coming online this summer that will require development to address not just kind of current flooding, but future flooding using the Northeast Climate Center projections through 2100. So just a policy example, just wanted to share with you all.
Yeah, really great work that's happening in New Jersey.
All right, thank you. So I'd like to thank Franco and Michael and Mark for setting the stage for us around climate change, nature-based solutions, and combined sewer overflows. If you didn't get that, that's what they were supposed to do. Very quickly, I'm Ellen Kohler. I'm the Director of Applied Research and Programs at the Water Center, and we're now going to transition into having 6 commenters share their reflections on this nexus of climate and nature-based solutions and combined sewer overflows. So if our commenters could come grace us with their presence at these lovely 6 chairs here, that would be great. So we'll go through these series of comments, and then we're going to have time for questions as well. Great. So as we're settling in, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first commenter. Dr. Pinar Balci has recently been appointed as the New York City
I got the short stick.
Water Lead and Deputy East Water Lead at WSP. Over the past decade, Pinar has spearheaded major infrastructure projects while serving as the Assistant Commissioner at the NYC Department of Environmental Protection. She orchestrated the nation's largest green infrastructure and innovative cloud burst management program with $3.5 billion budget that reduced combined sewer overflows, improving water quality in the New York Harbor while bolstering resilience in environmental justice communities. Pinar, would you like to share your reflections, please?
Yeah, first, I'm going to kick it off with, I didn't know I was going to be on this panel with my boss, my former boss. She's at the end, and, we worked over a decade together on the green infrastructure in New York City and competed with Mark. And I'm amazed to see that you're around 3,500 green acres. We thought we were closer, but so the reflections, I think I'm going to concentrate on 4 topics. The first is, Mark talked about the integration many of us really agree on, integration of the different competing needs is a must-have because we don't have enough funding, neither the private sector or the public sector. So looking at those competing needs between the water, wastewater, stormwater, added on the climate on top of it is going to require out-of-the-box thinking, and rather than siloed regulations in combined sewer overflows, MS4, PFASs, we have to really bring all those requirements under one water or integrated water approach. So I think that's one reflection that we all are going to agree to continue and find a way to really mean it, because we talk a lot, but we don't do a lot when it comes to integration. So that's, now I'm in the private sector, I can't say anything freely, but that is definitely a must-have. And I'm looking the back crowd here, which is the younger generation, the next generation. So you have to really raise up and advocate for this integration sooner than later. The second thing I would like to focus on is innovation. And I say it from the bottom of my heart, but I worked on the New York City's Green Infrastructure Program. Day one, we re-innovated the box, and Franco is here. He helped us to incorporate some of the science and the data measurement to see, can we really change it to make it more urban, but keep the green features to the extent practical. So we designed it and redesigned it and redesigned it over the years to find the right mix. And the moment you finish, you have to redesign. So I think that's something that we have to keep in mind, what you are seeing today when it comes to green, nature-based solutions. The beauty of nature-based solutions, in my mind, unlike the big brother of the gray, it really welcomes innovation. And that is the beauty of it, because you can really build it much faster and more innovatively compared to gray. So innovation and changing the basis of design is very key. So that's the second thing. The third thing that I want to apply is the science and data management. I know we talk about a lot with the partnerships, particularly the academic partnerships. The science that Franco showed is amazing. And that really comes from the academic background, right? The utilities, the private sector, we don't have the time to dive deep into the data, but that is integral for all of us to apply in a way that really makes a change in the future planning. Because if we spend most of the time, in my mind, in the front end planning and improving the modeling predictions, these models that we all rely on, the utilities rely on the models, and the models say you have to reduce 1 billion to meet the water quality of pathogens of 35 CFU. We all believe on it, right? We say this is what the model predictions are saying. So that is important to keep that data and science and really make our predictive tools to the extent more accurate, and that's going to help us the back-end infrastructure planning. And then the last thing that I'm really, really happy to be here, because I think this whole group is very passionate about what we do. I know Howard is. I met him almost 12 years ago, and he still talks about green infrastructure, and he picked that in lieu of PFAS. So that is through dedication and passion towards the green infrastructure. And being a practitioner for almost 22 years in the green infrastructure world, the first 10 years was saving the Everglades. And when I realized that I can't do it, I moved to New York City. But with that being said, we have to be passionate about it and never give up, right? That's the one thing, that never give up, that it could be PFAS next year, but the following year, we may be back again to green infrastructure. So that is what we have to be, keep pushing and keep innovating and keep integrating to make a difference for future generations, which most of you are here today.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to not go in order because we had the slides already set up, so sorry. So next we have Nancy Stoner. Nancy is the president of the Potomac Riverkeeper Network. She's one of the nation's most experienced water policy experts. She has a rich and distinguished background in protecting the nation's water quality. She began her career as an attorney in the Environment and Natural Resources Division of the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Yes, so did I. But I didn't go haven't done nearly as much as you have, and where she litigated and analyzed legislative proposals on a broad range of environmental and natural resources statutes. She also worked for many years at the Environmental Protection Agency, where she served as the acting assistant administrator for water. Nancy, would you please share your reflections?
Sure. So I didn't know I was going to do this at all, but but that's okay. This is not the first time I had to wing it in life. So I'm not going to try to give you advice in any way on the presentations that you just saw, which were fantastic, and what a great group of problem solvers that you saw presentations from. And I want to talk to you because most of you are the next generation of problem solvers in our country. And if nothing else that you got from that, I think you got that the problems are big and getting bigger. And so that is a challenge for you and an opportunity for you to bring the best you can, the best self you have to these challenges ahead of you. My guess is that you're people of varied talents, and that's what we need. We need people who come from different disciplines, who have different strengths, and who are up to the challenge, who are ready to take it on, ready to work in partnership with others, ready to use every tool in the toolbox. And you know what? You're going to find that it's very rewarding. You have picked the right field to be in. You're going to really enjoy it. Not every day, but over the course of your career, you will be able to see not only what you have done for the rivers, which is what I'm working on right now, the ecosystems, but the people. One of the things that that motivates me every day is ensuring that the benefits of clean water are enjoyed by everyone. And that's a challenge, too, that we haven't quite met in this country. So when I have a bad day, and sometimes I do, I go down to the Potomac River. I did it yesterday. I walked down to the Potomac River. I sat on the banks. I walked by a lot of highways and traffic and all kinds of crap, people beeping at each other. I sat on the banks of the river and I watched the ducks. I watched one canoeist. Everybody was moving slowly. Everyone was enjoying. I mean, the ducks, I don't know what they're thinking exactly, but I'm just saying the benefits of nature for our collective humanity are huge. And so you can be a part of that, and it is worth it.
Thank you, Nancy. So our next commenter will be Angela Licata. Angela is the Deputy Commissioner for the New York City Department of Environmental Protection and is a water utility professional with a wealth of experience in environmental management and sustainability. She is a strong proponent of infrastructure preparedness for a changing climate and has pioneered many strategies in New York City, including the largest green infrastructure program. The program has evolved under her leadership to tackle water quality and resilience issues alike. Angela?
Oh, thank you. So I wanted to follow up on what Nancy was saying. I'm really curious about how many of the students, well, actually everybody can play this, are engineering. If you could just raise your hand. Okay. Lawyers, scientists. All right, excellent. Communication specialists. All right. Well, we're doing great here because this is really what it's going to take, right? And I'm working every day with all of these disciplines. And frankly, I think that the strength is in numbers. I think everybody, with respect to an interdisciplinary approach, is really bringing different strategies, and that is what has been so powerful in New York City. I'd also like to stress that I do also subscribe to the notion that nature-based solutions are truly those that are defending nature, promoting nature, but who is that happening for? That's happening for the aquatic organisms, it's happening for, mammals and the rest of it, but it's also happening for the humans and for not just human enjoyment, but for our health and for our quality of life, which is really so significant. And I probably won't surprise you by saying that in New York City, we're 70% impervious. So a lot of our green solutions don't look very green at all. But you will have to use your imagination, because really what's happening with respect to the green infrastructure that we're developing, so much of it is happening beneath the ground. So you may or you may not see a green top or generated habitat value on top, but the work is happening by promoting the infiltration of water. It's promoting the detention of water. That's creating the capacity to polish that water before it hits the streams and our receiving waters. And it's also allowing us to build off of those practices and to promote larger practices that can help us with our increased rainfall and the flooding that we're having so often and much too frequently. So part of the other strategy that I wanted to leave you with is we're starting to really feel anxious and feeling as though we're racing against time, mainly because we're municipal water, right? So who are our stakeholders? They're the 9 million people that we serve in New York City. Who are our shareholders? They're our ratepayers, right? So all of these people we're accountable to. And they are starting to feel the pressures from the changing climate, and they want solutions. So we're having to shift the nature of our work from very regulatory driven to really helping people cope with some of the climate crises that we're in. Leave it at that. You're welcome.
Our next commenter is Adam Shellhammer. He's the Mid-Atlantic Director at American Rivers. Before joining American Rivers, Adam's professional pursuits allowed him to work across the Mid-Atlantic and abroad in New Zealand to better safeguard and improve precious water resources and build resiliency within targeted watersheds. He has a passion for working with people with diverse backgrounds and interests to become connected communities, better connect with communities back to the water and the land. Adam?
Thank you. That's an appropriate picture. That's a gin and tonic in the hand. I think in the spirit of being adaptable, what I had planned for today changed greatly after our morning session, working with folks from diverse backgrounds with diverse interests, hearing from our speakers. I could not hope to articulate NBS better than what we already heard. The one thing I think was powerful about this morning is that it really is an ecosystem of delivery. And being an ecologist, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And also, as human beings, we're part of that ecosystem, not extricated from it. So always keep in mind we are of the nature, with the nature, right alongside of it. But I think we've heard from different walks of life. We've heard from water service providers. They have certain obstacles they have to overcome. They're mandated to overcome in the next 10, 20, 30 years in perpetuity. We'll hear from some of our government partners. They're working within existing regulatory frameworks with existing policies. And so really it's understanding what your strengths are and where you can add value and have confidence that what you are doing is adding value. My counterpart here, I just want to acknowledge Leo Mastropolo, who's been leading the work in Philly on behalf of American Rivers. We have a lot to talk about after today. And I think that's a really good thing. We're coming away with more questions in a positive way. But I think leaning into our strengths is understanding how can we be a catalyst for these partnerships? How can we fill in gaps, whether it's advocating for more progressive funding, whether it's adding COM support for Philadelphia Water, bringing together partners that have barriers to partnership. So I think for us, being a catalyst in that regard and helping to facilitate NBS is a good way for us to move forward. But I think we all have a role to play. We legitimately have ecosystem engineers in the room, so thank you for that. So I think whether it's communications, whether it's engineering, whether it's legal, whether it's movement building or social sciences, there's going to be a role for all of us. And I think that was the most powerful part and takeaway for today, is that as a person, as an organization, know your niche within this ecosystem and go forward with confidence. And yeah, it's going to be exciting. There's a ton of work, but you can lean into it. So I'm excited, and I'll have another G&T this evening. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Our next commenter will be Nicole Lick. Nicole is a senior life scientist at the Environmental Protection Agency's Region 3 office here in Philadelphia. She serves as the Delaware River Basin Coordinator and lead for engaging communities facing environmental justice, and as the Water Reuse Liaison. Prior to EPA, Nicole spent 14 years at the Federal Environmental Management Agency working to improve resiliency and reduce risk from disasters. Nicole?
Yes, so I think I have firsthand experience sort of at this intersection of extreme weather and water quality. We called it flood crud because, when it floods, it's never clean, and, there's the consequences of that, like what is it? I think I want to start by sharing just a few things about like human behavior and mindset that I've sort of gathered are a challenge for all of us working in this space in my experience. And the first one is perspective. Adam just touched on this, like, where are you coming from? Like, what's your role? But kind of like, what is the perspective of the individual you're working with and or like the environment in which you're in. So I just came from a water reuse conference out in the western part of the country, and Dr. Surrey also talked about this, where people are water poor, right? There is not enough water, and there's water rights that now exist only on paper. People are already dealing with these issues. Right now, we're sitting in Pennsylvania, which has 86,000 miles of streams and rivers, second only to Alaska. So we are water rich, and that sometimes doesn't feel so great of a position to be in, right? It brings a whole host of other challenges that we're trying to tackle. I think the other one is we generally, as humans, are sort of we love procrastination and denial. So, this is not a priority for me right now, or that was the 1,000-year event, it's never going to happen again, or that's never going to happen to me if it hasn't happened to you yet. So kind of trying to figure out, like, what are the forcing functions that resonate with people? And having been to places immediately after a disaster, you would think that would be enough, and often it is not. We have very short memories, and we want to recover and move on as fast as possible and never think about that again, which really makes us disconnected from these like long-term solutions, right? If we don't even accept that it's a reality for us, why are we going to invest the kind of money that we need to invest in something that's going to fix problems years out? So I think like human psychology plays a big role in how we have to present these things, talk about them, and make them real for people. So with that, I'll go back to nature-based solutions, and I want to focus on a couple things. I mean, the first, and I think we've heard this from all the presenters, they are effective and they've been implemented effectively. So we want to keep doing them, not only just in reducing stormwater amounts, but also pollutant loads. So they are effective, and I'll say they're effective for many other reasons than just that, right? The co-benefits are so critical right now as we tackle climate change, but also environmental justice issues, right? These offer, in many ways, sort of community amenities that traditional gray infrastructure could not offer. I will add that there's sort of like no one-size-fits-all answer for nature-based solutions. There's a long list of things that their success depends on, and there's sort of unique characteristics of that site, like the local catchment, what's the existing collection system, land use, development patterns, stakeholder priorities, governance structures. And on top of all of those factors, we've got climate change changing our precipitation patterns, storm intensity and frequency, and our need, again, to focus on addressing the disproportionate impacts to underserved communities. So what should we do? The EPA recently published a draft guidance, Future National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDS, many of you are familiar, permits for combined sewer system guidance, and it's intended for like combined sewer system communities who are nearing the end of their long-term control plans, which were their strategies for reducing the impacts of those combined sewers on water quality. But I think there's a ton of things in there that make sense to consider now or at any point in time as you're tackling these challenges. And I will highlight a few. Transparent, robust public engagement. Again, there's a lot of people who have been left out of the conversation of the infrastructure that's aging now. When that was built, let's do a better job as we rebuild. Identification and implementation of approaches to remedy those disproportionate impacts, like where are the CSOs active and where are their basement backups? Who's actually being affected day to day? I will tell you, like when I'm out and people ask me what I do, if I mention this, most people have no idea that this is even happening right now. And, that's terrifying to me. But certain people know, and it's the people who are feeling the impacts every day. And then really, like, what are the projected changes in our precipitation patterns, sea level rise that we're going to face due to climate, and what are the impacts on current and future infrastructure that we're planning? And, really even specifically looking at how is that going to affect sort of our desired performance objectives in our long-term control plans? Are we going to get there? Do we need to think about different design storms? How do we address this? And what can we do to increase or enhance our climate resiliency through green infrastructure and sort of proactive asset management of our smart sewer technology? And that is where I will end.
Our last commenter will be Skelly Holmbeck. Skelly is the Executive Director for the Water Resources Association of the Delaware River Basin, promoting the sustainable and resilient management of water resources within the Delaware River Basin that spans 4 states and provides drinking water for 15 million people. She's also the Vice President of Ultimate Risk Services, a startup providing cybersecurity compliance tools for small businesses. Skelly?
So I stand between you guys and what is next, Ellen?
Awards.
Awards! Oh my gosh. All right. So if I was really courageous, I would say ditto what they all said. But I will say a few things. I started my water resources career as part of involved with the water wars down in Georgia. So I represented dozens of NGOs in the water wars. And I want to say we are not in water wars up here. And part of the reason is we have a structure that allows us to legally collaborate on sharing water, and that is the Delaware River Basin Commission. So huge thanks to Steve Tambini and his crew. It's not easy, but that structure allows us to form an overarching partnership that, at least with the Delaware River Basin, can keep us pointed in the right direction. So several people talked about funding. There's a lot of federal funding that's come out. This administration has done things with funding that are a first in my lifetime. We have made the pot of gold bigger. We have not taken any of the hurdles away to get to that pot of gold. So many water providers, wastewater treatment folks, say, where's the money? How do I get it? Communities will say, just give me the money. There's 18 people between me and that funding source. Can you just give us the money? You think about every cut, every bit of friction. We talk about in the internet world, if you take away friction, things can happen. So in the water world, it's the same. If we have one obstacle after another for people to secure federal funding, a lot of people who need it are not going to get it. And the last thing I want to talk about are data and tools. Understanding flooding risk seems so basic, but where do you go to get that data? The NOAA maps are outdated. First Street Foundation has come up with a whole new set of maps. I'm super excited about their work. I'm not sure how they're going back and testing their work, testing their models to update them. But if someone is planning for a pipe, planning a municipal conveyance, doing a development, where do they go? Even a homeowner who's going to buy a home, where do they go to get data and information to see what the design size should be? What if that home they're going to buy is not in a floodplain? It shouldn't take a master's degree to figure that out. So it should be easy to get your hands on that data. And then one of the speakers talked about tools. We don't have necessarily the right tools we need for each situation. We are developing them. You all are involved, a lot of you, with developing those tools. They also need to be readily available and understandable. And so really my water fantasy is a chat GPT where I can say, hello, I'm a blah, 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 and I'm planning X. How can I find out what the flooding risk is? And what are my tools to address that flooding risk? So if you guys have used ChatGPT or Perplexity, those tools right now can't do that. But that's how easy it should be for us to understand the risk and take action.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, for your comments. And what I very much appreciate is the diversity of comments you made, too. So thank you very much. We're going to turn now to some time for you all to share your own thoughts, your own comments, and or ask questions of our commenters or our presenters. We'll have a couple folks that have microphones. So is there anybody? Okay, no, we don't need microphones. Never mind. Yeah, go ahead.
Should I stand up?
Sure, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I'm Kaylin, and the question I have for you all is that I really appreciate nature-based solutions, and I do find them to be extremely beneficial. But one thing that I have to constantly do in my major, which is energy and sustainability policy, is I have to try to understand externalities and precautionary principle. And even though I do value nature-based systems, I just am wondering, what would you guys do in the face of dealing with an externality that was unexpected, or if a project we implemented may have caused harm that you weren't expecting? How would you deal with those externalities and the stakeholders involved? Thank you.
I could go first. Well, one of the things that occurs to me is that there has been so much emphasis on what the municipality can provide in terms of flooding relief, for example. And I think we're not doing enough to really work with homeowners to understand what they can do themselves to protect private property. I think that some of the funding, maybe even at the municipal level, should be available for private sector homeowners to be able to prevent those kinds of flooding risks to their private property. And I see that as somewhat of a disconnect right now. So for example, in New York City, we had terrible flooding and we lost life as a result of basement dwellings. And people are usually occupying basements because there's an affordable housing crisis. So that's an externality, that we're not considering when we're thinking about the vulnerabilities in the community and the fact that we won't be able to solve all of those problems. And we need to be able to get those priorities right, and we need to be able to bring that into sort of the realm of the focus area that we have with respect to flood relief.
I mean, I can add, like, this happens a lot. And in my mind, to avoid that risk, it's the front-end planning work that you have to invest a lot of time, and usually that's not allocated enough time, right? Like when a project is created, whether in the private sector or the public sector, it's a go, meaning you have to jump on it, design it, get the approvals done, get the permits done, put the bid out, and get it built, right? That's kind of like and it usually takes, even a nature-based solution is an 18 to 24-month design period. Then you add another 18-month build-out period, you're looking 3 to 4 years for a pretty standard design, right? So if you want to really avoid that cost avoidance, in my mind, you have to put extra effort in the front-end planning to make sure that you reduce that risk to minimal, right? There's going to be still a risk. You may hit a utility, you may hit a homeowner, you may hit a community that hates that green infrastructure in that community. But if you really plan and put that effort ahead of the time, advocate for it, be honest and transparent to the communities, bring advocates from those communities along with you, that's how you can avoid the risk and completely maybe come to a level even that risk may not exist at the time of your design, because that's usually the project management 101. You cannot really put the capital funds in place if there's a risk. So what you are doing is really good now, thinking about that in advance.
Ellen, can I just add a few more things, please? If I can just give it maybe like a small, medium, and very large response to that. When we first started citing green infrastructure, we were putting water in the ground, but that water was making it into people's basements, right? So just that understanding of how we were thinking about infiltration, how close to the foundation we were citing it, whether or not those sites needed to be lined, were all kind of a maturation process, but it all came from crap. We're putting water in people's basements, right? There's some kind of pathway to getting into basements. So negative consequence allowed us to learn through feedback loop, through observation, change our design, we moved on. That's the small example. The medium example is trash, right? We think we're making community amenities by investing in the neighborhoods, right? Modifying the landscape, bringing in surface water, vegetating these practices. We've had examples here in the city, unfortunately, with needles and human waste making their way into what we think are these beautiful rain gardens. You know, we have to think now about citing these practices in the neighborhood, and/or to what Pinar was saying is, if you know you're going to have a maintenance concern, if you think that may be an impact, you really have to ramp up, right, how you want to deal with maintenance in that area and make sure that whether it's security or safety or kind of, you know, an excessive amount of maintenance. That's the medium one. The large one, the most complex one, are the unintended consequences associated with gentrification with nature-based design. And that one, as far as I know, we have not solved that. We're not even close to solving that. I'm not sure there's a direct correlation to it or how much of a correlation, but we can't not place value infrastructure in communities of need where there's opportunity, right? We can't go and stop making improvements to park and recreation centers that bring value to that community because, you know, what it does is it chases out communities because now development comes in and like I know it's happening, but we can't let that stop us making investments in communities. And we're seeing the same thing with private development. We regulate private development for stormwater. People are embracing beautiful practices to manage stormwater, whether it's green roofs or you know, land-based applications. But the problem is that as Angela was saying, you know, developers want that money back when they make those investments, which means things are priced higher, which means now you're making housing very unaffordable for a lot of the community members. So small, medium, and large examples, some you can overcome, some you have to just throw more money at the issue, and some are really just things that we have not got our heads around, but are a greater societal issue that need to be addressed.
Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Debbie Mercer of Global Water Alliance, and I'm also an envision sustainability professional, which I think New York City uses the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure Envision program for some of the project work. There was a gentrification concern for an envision project down in Atlanta, and they actually built into the project design rent control for a lot of the apartments don't think it's like a permanent jet control, but it's a really interesting solution, or at least temporary solution to the gentrification question.
That's the thing.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Chris, and I wanted to follow up on what you've been talking about, Mark, with the PFAs, the PFAS that are at the end of the line that, all of a sudden municipalities are going to be forced to deal with or, remediate. And then I was curious also with your role, Nicole, as the Deputy Commissioner of Sustainability in New York City. I guess my larger question is just this, overwhelmingly, municipalities have to deal with waste after the fact, and I'm interested in how do we get circular economy policies implemented in cities so that the waste isn't something that we have to keep managing after the fact, which is super expensive. And if the federal government's going to manage, for RCRA, for Resource Recovery Act, back in the 70s, they could have regulated the production of hazardous waste materials and plastics and stuff like that. But they ended up basically giving way to the lobbyists so that now we have to manage the waste better, not the production. And so how do we get our cities and our municipalities to manage the waste upstream that you described as also ending up in these really awesome installations that are supposed to be healthy and green, but end up being filled with pollution inevitably, and also, especially in cities like New Orleans, exacerbate flood risk because they're clogging all of the drainage systems. How do we start to think together across federal policies that can start to make sure that waste is regulated at the producer side and not downstream, so the burden's on you or on the municipalities to remove these PFAs or the actual obstructing material. And then the second question is
that one's
is the urban ag, because urban ag nature-based solution intersection feels like it's understudied in places that are experiencing gentrification, food apartheid, and low income. It feels like this is also something that we need to be talking about with these intersectional co-benefits of nature-based solutions in ways that they can hold water but also provide this other benefit.
Agreed.
Okay, so we got two big questions there. Go ahead.
I mean, I've been doing a lot of thinking on the PFAS issue, and clearly I subscribe to your notion that it's really hard to take the regulations seriously that we just got 4 parts per trillion for drinking water, pushing all of that obligation onto the municipalities when the chemicals are still being produced. And there's not even any labeling. So as consumers, we don't even know how to avoid all of them, right? I mean, I clearly would eradicate them from my day-to-day life if I knew where all that PFAS was. So I'm very frustrated with that because not only do we have the drinking water regulations, and I don't think we shouldn't treat the PFAS once it's there. I think we have to do something about it, but we need to have the other sensible regulations come and be parallel with this now that we're realizing that this is a forever chemical. And then the other notion is that it's going to be part of the CERCLA process. And once that PFAS becomes part of CERCLA, the municipalities are once again going to pay a portion of the bill with the other industrial polluters. And we're not consumers. We're just downstream on the waste, so we're receiving that either in our source water or in our wastewater. And again, we're just, innocent, receivers, if you will. Mark, you want to add?
I was going to say.
Yeah, fantastic questions, and sometimes it's easy to dump on our regulators, right? But they, you can't have this chemical, right, in your water supply. You can't, right? I mean, there's the direct connection to health impact is drastic. We heard yesterday during their briefing, they are thinking a whole of government type of approach. They are thinking about ways to regulate this. I mean, this is going to be decades to get these chemicals out. Unfortunately, what's the next chemical, right? I mean, we're chasing chemicals, and it goes to your point of whether it's lobbying or just you can't keep up with that industry. And, we don't have a polluter pay mentality. And we need to get ahead of that, whether that's through lobbying, whether that's through a better, advocacy group as a collective of water practitioners. And we're getting there. We have NACWAs, we have AMWAs, we have AWWA. But this polluter pay mentality just doesn't exist, and that script needs to be flipped, or else we are just constantly going to be looked at as the entity who has to solve the problems, yet we're not having the commensurate funding come in to do it. Right? If this came with a satchel of money, a legitimate amount of money, not the money we hear is out there, but the actual money needed to bring about the investments, then we could deliver that, right? We know how to deliver assets, we know how to modify the treatment plants, we know what we could do. It's just the costs, and then it's the next thing that comes at us. So I think that this kind of, again, talk about a call to action to the young crowd here. We got to start saying the polluter needs to pay. We have to make the polluter pay. It's not the issue right now. It's easy to pick on, the folks that need to save the day, and those are your water and wastewater, providers. You talk about circular economy, and Angela just touched on that. Holy shit, the biosolids. We have a way to think about a beneficial use for biosolids right now. And once we all know there's PFAS in it, there's no treatment in the wastewater side of it right now. It's in our biosolids, right? We're thinking about ways to kind of land apply it. That won't happen anymore. So these contracts we have to make beneficial use of it, we're going to need to figure out a way to inject some other piece of the process that allows us to do it. So now we're talking about emerging technologies like gasification or pyrolysis, which are going to be more infrastructure implementation at a cost to try to get into that kind of circular economy. But that stuff exists, but trying to tell that story, trying to get the money you need, trying to have the technologies keep up with the next chemical, it's a very, very challenging process. So the urban ag piece, I wouldn't say it's understudied, it's underfunded and it's under-resourced. I think we all know community gardens make sense. I think we all know we need to have local ag economies. I think there's a tremendous amount, at least I'll speak for Philadelphia here. Parks and Rec, our urban ag director, is brilliant. They are brilliant, and we need to just be able to take what they've done and figure out a way to resource it. And that's kind of a governance structure. That's, we just need to get behind amazing plans like that. So I would say, again, it comes to resources. Some of that is some mindset change and a lot of what you heard from some folks here. But yeah, I thought those are two brilliant questions, so thank you.
Does anybody, before we go to another question, does anybody want to comment? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing, and I've been sitting here. I've only worked at the EPA for a year and a half, and my colleagues over there, I probably maybe shouldn't say this, but just my sense, like generally of federal regulation, is that some people have this perception that like it is going to keep us safe. It's like at the forefront of what it should be. And my personal perception is that we're last to the party. The amount of research and evidence that has to exist before a regulation comes into play, we are last. So if we're relying on like regulations, they're like part of the long-term game solution. We generally have a hunch that something's wrong in these areas way before the regulation comes into effect. So I just wanted to say that because I think I hear that a lot, that perception that like, oh, the regulation's here now, and now we all know. It's like, no, we knew, but where's the money, and like, where do we prioritize it with the 1,000 other things like on Mark's seesaw that he showed,
I mean, just to add on to that, the nature of our federal legislation on these things, right, is to set a minimum bar.
Yes.
Yeah. Right? States can always act to be more protective. We're setting a minimum bar.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we also lose that, right? That's the
necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's
like,
not a bad
we
thing,
kind
but
of
it's the
want it to
minimum
be
bar.
that way,
Yeah.
But just you have to be conscious that's the way it is.
So just a couple things. So I was pleased to hear you say that you thought that it was good to have a limit on PFAS in drinking water. So clearly the answer to this is getting innovation to occur to destroy these different PFAS chemicals, right? So, I keep seeing of these ideas people have, but if you have those kinds of skills to try to figure out how to destroy them, that's ultimately what needs to happen. There's a case that I'm aware of. It didn't involve me, so I apologize if there's someone here who says that I don't have it quite right. But my understanding is that there was a suit against a landfill for leachate that had PFAS in it. And as a result of that lawsuit, they took the leachate and put it in the sewage treatment plant where, as Mark said, there's no special treatment for PFAS. So we don't want to be in this kind of a circle. We want to figure out how to destroy it. Otherwise, we're just moving it from one medium to another. So one more thing is that you mentioned plastics. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think you said, you know, we can't control the sources, so now we just have to deal with it, or something along those lines. So I just want to push back on that one. So we are definitely being sold a bill of goods by the people who are saying, you know, we can recycle our way out of this, we can clean up our way out of this, or whatever. We have to change the mindset of people about single-use plastics in the United States. So I don't mean get rid of all plastic, obviously. There's lots of plastic that's around for 50 or 100 years, and there's lots of uses for it that are very valuable. But most of the plastic that's used in the United States is not used for something that's around for 50 or 100 years, and we don't have to do that. It's just a question of what we're used to doing. And our parents and grandparents and whatever, they didn't have single-use plastic, and they survived. And you know what? We can do it too. We need to model it for other people. We need to live walk the walk, live what we think. But I think that we can do it, but we have some very well-funded opponents.
Yeah. So, two quick things. First off, being in this room today was really amazing because I think you're hearing blunt honesty, and there's a humility with all the panelists that you don't usually get in other rooms. Like, you hear folks kind of laying it out how it is, the obstacles we're facing. And so you're kind of seeing the good, the bad, and everything else in between, which you don't, it's rare. So to be a practitioner, it's just really refreshing. So thank you, everybody, for that. On the ag side, the urban ag, I think the one thing we're kind of running up against in our organization as well is this sense of urgency, but it's in conflict with the need to slow down at times. And one thing that we're realizing is there's not enough dedicated funding for engagement. And this is not my phrasing, but somebody that we work with, but we need to recalibrate power dynamics in our community, and that takes time, and that takes trust, and that takes a long time to build. And so we can put funding in policies in place to promote urban agriculture, but I think when you're going through the project development, process, sorry for my stuttering, but as you're going through the project development process, working with those communities to fund what kind of elements they want within their nature-based solutions projects, whether it's food production, whether it's artistic elements incorporated, whether it's indigenous storytelling. Those are all things we need to create time and space for. There's also things like intellectual property or cultural property that you need to take into consideration. So all these things take time, and obviously we're facing down the brunt of climate change, so it's like, hurry up, we got to take action, they got to have big, hairy, audacious goals, but at the same time, you have to cut space to build these relationships, do the engagement, and we need to promote with philanthropic funders, with government entities, that we need more time, space, and funding to actually do that engagement and to do it properly, and to kind of stand on that. Otherwise, we're just it'll be a box-ticking exercise, and it's not going to get anyone anywhere.
So my question to you as practitioners and in all honesty, competitors with each other for funding, since it's not unlimited, how do you market for yourself? And how do you also market for things that are multi-use? And I'll kind of piggyback off of the urban ag. Like, how do you market and you lobby for yourself and those uses that you think to be multi-use?
Amanda's still here.
I'm not going to really answer that question, but I'll try. So at WRA, a lot of our members provide drinking water, and one of our challenges is letting people know that your drinking water is safe to drink and that you don't need to buy bottled water. So that's not really answering your question. But for municipalities, they don't necessarily have a marketing budget or a big marketing budget. They're just trying to deliver safe, reliable water. So, the challenge of getting the word out about the stormwater benefits from a program, or, yay, the wastewater treatment plant is working, so you don't have sewage in your basement, and that you can actually drink your drinking water. It is, I would say, it's a huge challenge for these folks providing critical services, because often they don't have the funds to talk about the benefits.
So, I mean, one thing that I think important for funding, and we discussed it in the morning session, is where do you put the infrastructure at, right? Like the water infrastructure. The green infrastructure is mostly, at least in the cities, are happening in the right-of-way. Then it's the parkland, maybe some degree schools, and public housing is a newcomer, right? Like those are the publicly owned properties, but most of it's happening in the right-of-way. Who owns the right-of-way? Who does? Who? No. Who does? Who owns the right-of-way? Transportation agencies, right? So that's I think where this that's not happening yet, but ideally it should happen, is where we built the water infrastructure, at least in New York City, that funding can be combined if it happens at the same place. Like you are putting the sewer system, the DOT can pay the resurfacing if they are planning to resurface that area for their own purpose, for milling and paving purposes. So finding those synergies among the different partners, I think, is a key. Kind of like if they are already doing some capital plan improvement, here you go, you can go ask for it. The other funding I think, comes from nonprofits, right? There's a lot of funding that utilities cannot apply, but nonprofits do qualify to apply. And that's really important, because utility funding has to end up with capital work, versus nonprofit funding doesn't have to end up with capital work. And that's kind of like the tie-in, if that pre-planning could be funded by nonprofits, right, the other partners we have in the space, and then the utility can take up from where it's left off and move on the design and construction. So I think the question is, where are you targeting for that funding, and what's the purpose for it, and who are the players in that locality to be able to combine the funding for? I think, Angela, you have a great example of that.
That was good, Pinar, probably better than my answer. I was going to focus a little bit more on the urban ag, which we are very keen on developing further in New York City. Mayor Adams is a big proponent of urban agriculture, and oftentimes we take him to see our stormwater solutions and our green infrastructure grant funding that has maybe developed a rooftop farm, and he's mostly focused on the urban ag. We keep telling him, this is a stormwater project, and yeah, he gets that, but he's very, very enamored with the possibility of urban agriculture. So I just wanted to mention that. Also in New York City, maybe unique, but in the watershed, because we have watershed protection, one of the barriers in providing source water protection is to provide funding from New York City to the farms that are up within that watershed area, so that they can develop best practices, whether it's, dairy farming and or regular, agricultural earth farming activities to reduce sedimentation. So that is a transfer of wealth that is happening. And then just building off of what Pinar was saying, when we do our green infrastructure on other people's properties in New York City, that is really important, because the Water Authority doesn't own very much land. We have very limited land, pumping stations, wastewater treatment plants. They're not in the right locations to really do stormwater management. So when we're working on our public lands, we have to bring something to the table. So if it's a schoolyard, we have to develop a playground that is better than the playground that is there today. We work with the Trust for Public Land to bring those synergies to those programs, whether it's New York City Housing Authority, similar concepts, and as well as working on the parklands. We need to be able to introduce the stormwater practices, but also have better recreation than we had in the past, to give them a reason to want to go through the painful process of having to dig up that land and having to maybe take it out of circulation for a period of time.
I don't know if I understood your question correctly, but I think you were sort of saying, like, what are we doing to promote nature-based solutions coming in and getting the funding that's available? And I don't know if, I mean, I think a lot, but I don't know that it's as effective as we would like. For, like, when I was still with FEMA, they came out with the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities grant, BRIC, and, you know, EPA has the state revolving funds, which both have, like, different incentives or green set-asides for these kinds of projects. And in the first year of BRIC, like, the whole point of it was to promote non-traditional projects from a mitigation perspective. And they didn't get a lot of applications that weren't traditional. Mm-hmm. And despite, like, what we thought was our best effort to, like, educate and promote and incentivize those kinds of projects. So I don't know that I have, like, the answer for you why it's not working as well as we would like why there are not as many applications coming in for these kinds of projects as I think anyone would like to see. So I think there's probably a variety of obstacles in there that we have yet to overcome, but I think it's a great question for that reason.
Can I add one more thing? Yeah, so I also heard in the question the idea about the conflicts around funding, whether it's the type of entity funded or just conflicts like within government or between NGOs or whatever over funding. And while those exist, I think it's really important to try to keep out of the mindset that you're in competition with someone else over the funding. I think, and it's hard to do, but I just think it's important to think that what you want to do is make sure that what you're advocating for funding for, whether you're in a governmental role or in a nonprofit role or whatever, is a good investment for the person who's making the investment. And you're not really responsible for the other things that might be out there that aren't being funded. And I say that in part looking at like the amounts of funding that are coming out of the federal government right now, which are astronomical as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, if you sort of look at it from the idea it's a zero-sum game, there's never more money, we have to just figure out how to divide this little piece of money 12 ways or whatever, in some ways you're missing the opportunity. Well, if you paint a picture for here's something that's more important or bigger or you know, it requires more attention and funding, maybe it'll get it. And so anyway, so that's all I have to say about that.
All right, I want to thank all of our commenters. Very nice. I want to note that we're going to be in touch with all of you because, yes, we have your email addresses. And we're going to give you an opportunity to also provide your reflections back with us so that we can incorporate them in our, our final deliverable or final report on this too. So please keep that in mind. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody, but we do want to provide that opportunity. And so with that, I'm going to invite Howard and Cynthia back up to close us out.